Chamei para 15 minutos também, justamente para que a gente não tenha, né, não tenha nenhuma dificuldade, para que seja... Ó, espera aí, Dieguinho. Eu te deixei falar aqui, mas eu vou te promover a painelista, tá? Pronto, já estamos ao vivo.
O professor Diego também está entrando.
Tá aí.
Bom dia, Diego.
E aí, Dieguinho?
Bom demais?
Firme e forte?
Beleza. Todo mundo
Que é isso, bicho?
tá pensando, viu?
Eu sei que tá, ué. Não, fica tranquilo. Que escritório bonito, Dieguinho.
Oi?
Escritório bonito.
Bem improvisado aqui na minha sala, da minha casa.
É, ficou bom, ficou bom.
E o bom é que ele faz igual o pessoal da Google, tem joguinho, mesa de tal, de vez em quando já dá uma relaxada, isso é ótimo.
Que pode tem os elásticos para fazer exercício também.
O negócio lá do Serapilheira, né? Aquela palestra lá que o cara, o suíço, deu lá, ele comentou justamente sobre isso. Por exemplo, né, nós três aqui, o fundo ele não é monótono, ele é favorável a ser uma placa cinza, né? Mas em outros lugares que eu li também, o fundo ele não deve ser nem muito monótono, mas também não deve ter nada assim, né? Imagina se eu tivesse uma caneca aqui com a foto o número 17 nela, por exemplo, né? Então isso geraria mais atenção do que a própria palestra que eu estava dando.
Não, que o Marcos é cruzeirense, a foto da raposa lá na parede. Ele fala que é flamenguista, mas agora eu achei o segredo dele.
Isso é uma homenagem ao nosso programa pós-graduação, que tem o lobo-guará como um grande símbolo, cara.
Nosso programa de pós-graduação agora podia mudar de bicho, né? Já que o lobo-guará foi cooptado pela nota de R$200, né?
Pessoal, 9 horas, vamos começar então? Então vamos lá.
Antes de começar, na hora que eu for falar, eu tenho que fazer alguma coisa ou minha carinha vai sempre estar aqui? Como é que eu vou? Como é que eu tô?
Não, na hora de falar, Dieguinho, lá embaixo tem um botãozinho que está escrito Share Screen.
Tá.
E aí, na hora que você compartilhar a sua tela, automaticamente, para quem está te assistindo, a tela vai para o principal. Beleza. E você vai para o cantinho.
Então tá, eu fico mutado aqui.
Beleza.
Pode ser, isso.
Então vamos lá. Bom dia, pessoal, sejam muito bem-vindos ao nosso segundo dia do workshop PRED. Ontem nós tivemos ótimas discussões, as palestras foram muito interessantes e hoje certamente seguiremos no mesmo caminho. Para os alunos que estão matriculados na nossa disciplina, no programa pós-graduação em Ecologia, Conservação e Manejo de Vida Silvestre, eu só reforço, né, a organização que nós estabelecemos. Pelo Moodle, eu estou disponibilizando o PDF dos slides dos palestrantes e também estou colocando lá as sugestões de artigos científicos que tratem sobre o assunto. E esse conjunto de materiais vai ajudar vocês a preparar o resumo de 2 páginas que a gente pede que seja feito na tarde de amanhã, fechando então a avaliação da nossa disciplina. Hoje nós temos o prazer de receber o professor Ricardo Solar, que é o nosso coordenador do programa de pós-graduação em Ecologia, Conservação e Manejo de Vida Silvestre. O Ricardo vai falar para a gente sobre a utilização de imagens aéreas numa interface entre ecologia da paisagem e ecologia de riacho. Então, desde o início da proposta do PRED, a gente está discutindo, aprofundando, e ele vai falar melhor sobre isso. Na sequência, nós receberemos o professor Diego Macedo, Departamento de Geografia do IGC, parceiro nosso dentro da proposta PRED, que vai abordar os aspectos geográficos. E às 10 horas, então, nós teremos a participação do nosso parceiro internacional, norte-americano que trabalha na Suíça há mais de 20 anos, 30 anos, o Chris Robinson. O Chris é uma pessoa que tem muita experiência em ecologia de riacho, muitos artigos fantásticos em termos de interações, e vai trazer para a gente slides com sua vivência, que também vai enriquecer a nossa abordagem, a nossa discussão de PRED. Eu gostaria de incentivar os nossos alunos da pós-graduação que participem, questionem, façam comentários, observações. A interação científica em torno de uma proposta como essa é muito importante. Bob, então, por favor, seja muito bem-vindo. Obrigado por você estar participando com a gente e oferecendo, então, a sua palestra agora. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Marcos. Diretamente da Rede Globo hoje, né? Eu vou compartilhar minha tela aqui. Vocês já estão vendo?
Estamos sim, Bob.
Ótimo. A minha ideia aqui, na verdade, né, eu conversei isso bastante com o Marcos, é trazer essa proposta do uso, né, de imagens aéreas, mas não imagens aéreas numa distância em que é muito grosseira a resolução que a gente tem. Então, seriam, né, justamente essas imagens obtidas pelo que a gente chama de RPA, mas os famosos drones, para que a gente possa caracterizar os riachos. Então, antes de entrar exatamente, né, no tema da palestra, eu queria mostrar o que eu vou falar hoje. Eu começo um pouco com esses grandes problemas atuais em ecologia e conservação, né? Na verdade, eles são os grandes motores de tudo que a gente pretende estudar, tanto nessa disciplina, mas na nossa pós-graduação como um todo. E aí, sim, 4 pontos de como, né, os drones, os RPAs, podem nos auxiliar nos estudos de ecologia. Então, eles podem auxiliar na documentação, ilustração e divulgação científica. Eu acho que isso talvez seja o mais óbvio do uso dos RPAs. Então, eu vou tocar nesse ponto, mas é interessante a perspectiva que a gente tem e como o engajamento público pode ser maior. Daí, a prospecção de áreas de pesquisa mais precisas, né, isso, por exemplo, na nossa perspectiva PRED é extremamente importante. O emprego de protocolos em escalas espaciais maiores do que aquelas que a gente consegue realizar simplesmente dentro do rio, e o monitoramento de padrões das paisagens, que é o que a gente tem como objetivo maior, né, dentro desse método na nossa disciplina. E quais são as perspectivas futuras que a gente pretende, né? Como eu falei ontem, essa disciplina ela deveria acontecer imediatamente antes de uma saída de campo. Então, o que a gente espera, né, fazer no futuro? Bom, sobre os grandes problemas atuais em ecologia e conservação. Esse é um grande resumo do que acontece no nosso planeta. A gente tem o que a gente chama de efeitos em cascata e a gente tem o que são os motores de mudanças, né, globais causados pelas mudanças antrópicas no sistema. Eles alteram ciclos biogeoquímicos e comunidades biológicas. E tudo isso ocorre de uma maneira muito interligada, ou seja, a gente não é capaz de dissociar a atividade antrópica das pressões na biodiversidade, dos ciclos biogeoquímicos, e mais importante do que não conseguir dissociar a nossa atividade do que é causado, a gente também não consegue dissociar as causas, né, que a gente altera no ambiente dos retornos que a gente observa. Então, ontem foi o dia mais quente do ano em Belo Horizonte. É impossível dissociar o desconforto que nós tivemos, né, das atividades antrópicas, por exemplo, causando essa modificação no meio ambiente. E por que a gente é tão interessado em estudar esse lugar em que a gente vive, né? Primeiro porque é o país que a gente mora, claro, mas por que tem gente que vem de tão longe estudar? Basicamente porque os trópicos, especialmente a América Latina dentro dos trópicos, e talvez especialmente o Brasil dentro da América Latina, é um dos pontos mais biodiversos do planeta. Então é onde as grandes mudanças ocorrem e também é onde a gente tem a maior quantidade de biodiversidade. Portanto, estudar esses locais é imprescindível. E, claro, todo mundo já deve ter visto essa figura, o planeta está sob pressões em vários dos seus aspectos, seja, por exemplo, na biodiversidade, na integridade da biosfera, mudanças climáticas, ciclos biogeoquímicos, mudanças de uso da terra e por aí vai, beleza? Então, o cenário em que a gente coloca as nossas perguntas e os nossos problemas é esse, é um cenário de mudanças globais causados primordialmente pelas atividades antrópicas. Bom, o que acontece? Várias propostas existem para que a gente pegue uma curva de declínio total da biodiversidade, essa curva cinza, o que a gente chama de business as usual, ou seja, se tudo continuar como está, a gente tem um declínio acentuado e com previsões muito negativas para os próximos 70 anos. Mas muitas das iniciativas globais, elas têm tentado dobrar, né, tanto o bending the curve, que é pegar essa curva de declínio e forçá-la a algo menos trágico. E aí, sim, o aumento das atividades de conservação, mas principalmente entender o que são os métodos sustentáveis, né? Então, e é onde a ecologia mais pode contribuir. Quais são os feedbacks positivos que a gente tem e que a gente pode usar a nosso favor? E aí vem a grande pergunta, né? Essa é uma foto, por exemplo, lá da região de Paracatu de Baixo, afetada pelo desastre de Mariana. O que a gente quer saber é quais são os processos que sustentam a persistência de biodiversidade nesse cenário de paisagens alteradas. Então, dentro, por exemplo, da nossa iniciativa PRED, os processos tróficos são extremamente importantes para as nossas perguntas. Então, a gente quer entender um pouco de como que isso funciona. E aí, eu entro um pouco mais no assunto do que eu me propus a falar sobre o emprego dos drones. Bom, vamos lá, então, passo a passo, sobre a documentação, ilustração e divulgação científica. Olha só, o Manancial de Tabuões, né, que a gente sempre fala dele, é um lugar fantástico. E aí, em parceria com o pessoal do Parque da Serra do Rola Moça, a gente fez essas imagens do Parque do Rola Moça. Tem um áudio dramático, eu vou tentar colocar o meu fone perto do microfone para vocês ouvirem, que fica melhor. Bom, além, claro, da beleza das imagens, esse vídeo ele foi distribuído, né, tanto por nós quanto pelas colegas lá do Parque do Rola Moça no Dia da Mata Atlântica, mostrando não só do ponto de vista da beleza cênica do local, mas da importância da unidade de conservação, das matas, dos sistemas de montanhas para fornecimento de água para uma região tão grande quanto Belo Horizonte. Uma foto do manancial ela é boa, mas uma imagem que é capaz de capturar todo o contexto da paisagem, que leva aquele fio d'água, de uma água tão especial, isso só veio com o advento dessa nova tecnologia, né? É inimaginável que dois colegas de uma universidade fizessem imagens aéreas 10 anos atrás. A gente teria que ter um helicóptero, né? Não faz o menor sentido pensar nisso alguns anos atrás. Então, na divulgação científica, é muito importante, e é importante que a gente vá a campo com a ideia de produzir esse tipo de material. Então, isso é um dos usos. Agora, nos usos, vamos dizer assim, mais científicos da tecnologia, uma delas é a prospecção de áreas de pesquisa mais precisas. Então, por exemplo, junto com o André, esse é o André, ele é meu co-orientado de doutorado lá em Viçosa, a gente estava procurando áreas com mortalidade de árvores à beira, né, do Ribeirão do Carmo, nas áreas lá de Mariana. E beleza, da estrada a gente conseguiu ver, né, tirou uma foto com o celular, várias árvores mortas. Quando a gente fez isso, qual foi a grande vantagem? A gente fez isso em uma manhã de campo. A gente, com a imagem aérea, percebeu que, na verdade, a entrada do rejeito na floresta e as manchas de rejeito, vejam aqui, elas causaram uma mortandade, né, mais ou menos previsível e localizada aqui dessas árvores, nos permitindo extrapolar muito mais as nossas hipóteses para as árvores que tiveram contato direto, contato secundário com a lama. Além disso, né, quando você vai na região hoje, em muitos locais é difícil perceber onde houve o impacto, por exemplo, nos ambientes aquáticos e principalmente na interface aquática e terrestre. Então, com imagens do alto, a gente consegue ver, por exemplo, os grandes depósitos ainda de rejeito que existem, eles não estavam visíveis da estrada, a gente sequer sabia que isso estava lá, e, além disso, em áreas que já estão, em grande parte, revegetadas, a gente consegue ter uma noção, pela geografia do lugar, aonde houve a deposição de rejeito. E essa matinha que a gente vê aqui, que não era interessante num primeiro momento, vejam, ela está a cerca de 200 metros aqui, mais ou menos, do rio. Então, ela não era interessante num primeiro momento para que a gente estudasse as comunidades de árvore que vivem na zona ripária, porque estava muito distante. Mas a gente percebeu pelas imagens aéreas que, na verdade, essa mata ela foi a zona ripária diretamente afetada pelo rejeito, né? Claro, junto com essa tripinha de floresta aqui. Então, um outro lugar, e aí esse talvez seja o que vocês mais ouviram falar até o momento, essa é uma ortoimagem do Indaiá. A diferença de uma ortoimagem de uma foto é que ela é uma montagem de centenas de fotos que a gente fez ano passado durante a disciplina do Biobras. Bom, a gente chega no Indaiá por esse caminho vermelhinho aqui, ó. E aí a gente realiza boa parte das nossas atividades, aquelas que a gente comentou ontem, de ver os insetos, nesse ponto e nesse poção. Né? A gente, claro, por uma questão de limitação de tempo e tudo mais, a gente não se desloca durante, né, em todo esse percurso. Mas vejam bem, e claro, né, quando a gente chega lá, essa é a imagem que a gente vê. Bom, para que se movimentar mais, né? Já é lindo desse lugar. O que acontece é que a gente tem a possibilidade aqui de trabalhar exatamente chegando por essa trilha, conhecer toda a extensão do riacho e aí sim definir, bom, essa área é importante, aquela área é importante, eu preciso chegar até ali. Qual que é a vantagem? Eu faço isso em 10 minutos. Né? Eu não preciso andar toda a área, enfim, numa amostragem mais sistematizada e mais longa, né, com muitos córregos para mostrar, isso ajuda bastante. Então, por exemplo, quando nós pudermos ir a campo, a gente vai prospectar áreas para a atividade de campo dessa disciplina desse jeito. Outra coisa é que a gente pode empregar protocolos em escalas espaciais maiores. Então, voltando ao córrego Indaiá, essa é a imagem que a gente tem. E aí você vai me perguntar, Bob, como é que eu vou aplicar um protocolo numa imagem dessa? Várias coisas. A primeira, vejam bem, eu tenho uma escala aqui. Essa escala quer dizer que essa imagem ela é toda georreferenciada. Eu consigo tirar todas as medidas que eu preciso. Além disso, né, o protocolo, desculpa, eu estava me esquecendo de mencionar, né, que está como material suplementar desse artigo da Janaína, que é nossa aluna nessa disciplina, mas que também são coautores o professor Diego Macedo e o professor Marcos Calisto, além do Rafael Ligeiro e do Bob original, o Robert Mason Hughes, o Bob Hughes, o nosso estimado amigo, e que faz questão de me lembrar toda vez que ele é o Bob original e eu sou o Bob fake. Mas está tranquilo, ele tem todo direito. Bom, voltando à história do córrego Indaiá, vejam bem, eu estou falando aqui de poder aplicar porque eu consigo gerar uma imagem completamente georreferenciada e completamente disponível com as altitudes e com tudo mais. Então, eu pegando o protocolo, eu consigo medir extensão da zona ripária, extensão do riacho, eu consigo medir a profundidade do canal, eu consigo medir a declividade do canal, ou seja, dentro daquele protocolo da Janaína et al., eu consigo chegar em vários dos pontos do protocolo e preencher simplesmente com um sobrevoo e imagem aérea. Então, eu adianto muito o meu trabalho. Vejam bem, os pontos em laranja aqui são aqueles que dá, talvez, tá? Mas eu consigo preencher vários pontos aqui. Alguns, como estimativas da zona ripária, influência humana, eu consigo preencher até melhor, porque eu tenho uma visão da paisagem como um todo. Para terminar, então, a gente pode, por exemplo, fazer a monitoramento da paisagem. Né? Por exemplo, nesse artigo do Rafael Ligeiro e demais, eles demonstram a importância dos bancos de folha, por exemplo, como ilhas de biodiversidade. Então, eu posso pegar esses bancos de folha agora, estimá-los do alto, e aí sim, mais ou menos seguindo essa figura, eu posso olhar para um riacho do alto, aproximar o rio, a resolução dessas imagens às vezes é de 1 centímetro, e entender os diferentes hábitats que existem nesse rio. Por quê? Porque eu posso usar também câmeras multiespectrais, que me permitem ver infravermelho e essas coisas. Ou seja, adianta muito a capacidade que a gente tem de entender um ecossistema de riacho no contexto da paisagem em que ele está. Ou seja, um rio ele não é sozinho, né, desconectado do sistema terrestre. Muito pelo contrário, ele é o conector. Os rios são essas veias do sistema terrestre. Eu consigo enxergar isso do alto. Com perspectivas futuras, e claro, indo para o final, o que a gente quer fazer, tanto nessa disciplina como nossos trabalhos, é quantificar esses bancos de folhas como indicadores de qualidade de habitat. Então, eu preciso escolher uma área crucial para recuperar, por exemplo, um grande desastre, né, com essas imagens. Eu consigo, e claro, quais são essas mudanças físicas nos riachos e na paisagem que podem decorrer dessas mudanças de níveis tróficos que a gente quer trabalhar nessa disciplina. Então, eu queria agradecer aqui a vários parceiros, também, como eu tinha colocado no início, né, sem esquecer o PROECOS como um projeto que tem abordado isso tudo, ao DAD como um grande parceiro que tem permitido essas parcerias, e ao Marcos pelo convite em poder participar dessa disciplina. Muito obrigado, pessoal.
Oh, maravilha, Bob. Obrigado pela apresentação, belíssima, né, como sempre, e muito interessante, que mostra uma outra forma de olhar tudo que a gente está discutindo nessa disciplina PRED-out, né? Ontem nós tivemos discussões muito interessantes quanto às interações, ferramentas de amostragem, como se desenvolver metodologia científica para se abordar uma questão complexa, ainda pouco explorada, e agora então você traz um outro olhar, né, para tudo isso que está sendo discutido nessa disciplina. Eu gostaria, então, de abrir a discussão para os nossos alunos matriculados e também perguntar se os outros colegas que estão assistindo, se tem alguma pergunta, alguma contribuição a fazer para a fala do Ricardo Solar.
Diga aí, Dieguinho.
Ô, Ricardo, excelente, cara. Eu gosto muito de ver as suas falas, porque você é um cara que sai daquela ecologia puramente ecológica e realmente coloca o homem no meio da ecologia, que não é que assim, há 20 anos atrás meio que o homem ficava um pouco de lado. Vamos tratar aqui das questões dos processos ecológicos, sim, o homem está aqui, mas enfim. E eu acho super interessante as suas inserções, justamente porque o homem está mudando muito o ambiente, está mudando muito os processos ecológicos. Enfim, a ecologia é uma ciência bem geográfica, assim, a geografia está no centro da ecologia, isso é muito legal. Cara, o seu voo com drone que você fez, aquela ortofoto, qual câmera que você usou? Você usou a câmera normal ou foi uma multispectral?
Aquela foi só RGB, Diego, só RGB normal. Com validação de solo, né? A gente teve alguns pontinhos no solo em que a gente ia com o GPS. O ideal é, claro, é ir com Trimble e conseguir, né, 3 centímetros. Mas o que a gente
conseguiu fazer o modelo de terreno e o canal com a RGB?
E é engraçado porque é estupidamente fácil. Porque como ele faz o sobrevoo e ele, basicamente, o software ele combina imagens tanto com a câmera 90 graus, mas com a câmera 60 e 30 graus, pelo paralaxe das imagens, ele consegue construir a diferença de altitude validado pela medida de GPS no solo.
Senhores, olha só, a gente tem aqui uma pergunta da Isabela e a Janaína e o Diego levantaram as mãos. Então, para a gente não perder o horário, que eu gostaria da gente tentar conectar com o Chris Robson 15 minutos antes das 10, eu pediria ao Bob que respondesse a Isabela, na sequência a Janaína, que é nossa estudante, e agora a Larissa. Bob, por favor.
Vamos lá. Isabela, desafios e dificuldades para a utilização mais ampla. Primeiro, é uma tecnologia relativamente nova e talvez ainda um pouco cara, né? Então, ainda há uma resistência, ainda há uma dificuldade financeira mesmo para isso, mas como qualquer desses métodos, ele é um método novo que está sendo, né, trabalhado e adaptado para que a gente faça. Como principal desafio e dificuldade da técnica em si, é computacional. São imagens muito grandes, né? Uma imagem simplesinha dessa do Indaiá tem 2 GB. Né? Então, são imagens grandes que a gente tem essa dificuldade. Janaína, eu tenho que deixar ela falar, beleza, Marcos? Para ela perguntar. Diga, Jana.
Vocês me ouvem?
Sim, senhora.
Bem rapidinho, por favor, por causa do horário.
Ei, Bob, obrigada pela sua apresentação, bom dia. Você estava falando aí enfim, mostrando a metodologia, e eu fiquei lembrando do desafio que eu tive no meu mestrado para poder justamente conseguir mapear e realmente validar os locais que eu entendia, né, que a gente entendia como riachos de referência, né, considerando o uso e ocupação do solo da bacia. E aí, logo na sequência, você até citou o artigo em que a gente publica esse protocolo simplificado, obrigada pela referência, Mas, de fato, assim, eu fiquei pensando, poxa, se eu tivesse um drone, facilitaria muito a minha vida, assim, teria facilitado muito. E aí eu fiquei pensando, a minha pergunta, na verdade, é sobre as hipóteses, né, que estão sendo construídas sobre o PRED-out, de que como que a gente utilizaria o drone, né, como uma ferramenta para reforçar a ideia de que, de fato, os peixes que são predadores, eles não ocorrem naquele local por questões geográficas, né, ou limitações de dispersão,
Excelente
e não
pergunta.
por conta daquela outra ideia que você colocou ontem, que eu fiquei pensando sobre isso, que era de que talvez os bentos maiores pudessem predar as larvas de peixe, né? Então, por isso que os peixes não ocorriam lá, né?
Ótima pergunta, Jana. É o seguinte, na verdade, a gente não tem como responder, né? Como qualquer técnica, não é uma panaceia. Mas quando a gente consegue ter essa noção da geografia, né? Como o Diego já comentou, isso nos ajuda a excluir efeitos que a gente teria dúvida medindo os bichos dentro d'água. Então, é a combinação dos métodos que ajuda a responder, né? E não exatamente um deles. Então, se a gente tem uma boa condição de responder as perguntas do ponto de vista, né, da geografia, isso nos liberta para, sabendo esses efeitos, testar dentro d'água. Beleza?
Bob, 2 minutinhos, você consegue comentar sobre a Larissa?
Consigo sim. Bem rapidinho aqui. Opa, fiz um negócio errado aqui, Jana. Deixa eu só... Enquanto eu faço aqui, Larissa, a tecnologia é talvez extremamente acessível, na verdade, porque... Pronto, resolvi. É extremamente acessível. Um drone não é muito mais caro do que um forno mufla ou nada disso. Então, é mais mesmo entender a importância e utilizar. Bom, Dayana, estudos, por exemplo, de herbivoria sem necessidade de coleta e tal, talvez, mas eu ficaria bem cético. São excelentes oportunidades para que a gente valide a técnica, mas eu não acho que a gente possa assumir que ela resolve. A gente, por exemplo, está fazendo um trabalho junto com o pessoal da Alemanha para medir capacidade de bromélia guardar água. Isso está sendo feito porque a gente coletou em solo e fez as imagens de drone e agora está vendo se isso é interpolável. Mas, claro, depende dessa validação. Scarlett, a facilidade de percepção. Bom, Scarlett, para ter essa percepção de cima, a gente tem os satélites, né? E cada vez satélites melhores, mas a resolução dos satélites, ela vai, Diego me corrige se eu estiver errado, nas imagens disponíveis, talvez até uns 3 metros, né? Nas mais prontamente disponíveis, assim, né? Sentinel, essas coisas assim, vai ter uma resolução melhor. Mas o drone te dá 1 centímetro de precisão. Então, depende da sua pergunta. Se a precisão, por exemplo, para bancos de folha, satélite não resolve, a gente perderia esse dado. Mas, se a minha pergunta é numa escala maior, eu não preciso dos dados de drone. Então, como qualquer qualidade de dado, né, a precisão do dado ela depende especificamente da sua pergunta. E aí, Marcos, só para fechar, sim, a probabilidade com primata, por exemplo, o Fabiano Melo, lá de Viçosa, tem feito isso de maneira brilhante. Então, com câmeras térmicas e tal, eu vivo cutucando ele para que a gente monitore pequenos mamíferos no campo rupestre. Seria fantástico, completamente possível. Marcos, corri aqui para responder, eu acho que eu consegui.
Muito obrigado. Desculpe, né, a forçação de barra, mas todos nós sabemos que eventos como esse, realmente o tempo ele é diamante. Então,
mais do que você, eu fico louco com o tempo, então fica tranquilo.
Bom que nossos alunos estão interessados, estão participando, e agora então convidaria o nosso colega, amigo, professor Diego Macedo, a fazer sua apresentação também de 15 minutos dentro do nosso workshop. Diego, a palavra está contigo.
Obrigado, Marcos, pelo convite. Eu queria só uma coisinha para completar, que eu acho que é importante do que o Ricardo falou, é que o drone, a gente tem a imagem na hora que a gente coletou, na hora que a gente precisa. A imagem satélite tem que comprar, é a hora que tem, é o satélite que tem, o drone, a maior vantagem é essa. Então, se você fizer uma validação em campo, você está validando exatamente na mesma hora que você coletou. Então, isso é um diferencial, entre outras coisas, em relação às imagens de satélite. Então, muito bem.
Muito bem colocado, Dieguinho. Obrigado.
Vontade para o campo, né, meu filho?
A ideia era essa.
Nós já vemos sua tela, tá, Diego?
Joia. Então, moçada, muito obrigado. Então, agradecer aqui o convite do Marcos, fazer essa pequena apresentação aqui dentro desse workshop. E, claro, devido aí enfim, devido à situação que nós estamos vivendo, o mais interessante era realmente a gente estar em campo e ver alguma das coisas que eu vou mostrar aqui na apresentação. Enfim, o Marcos já disse que eu sou professor do Departamento de Geografia, aqui da UFMG, e sou geógrafo e doutor em Ecologia, então eu acabo transitando aí entre essas duas áreas. Então, o que eu vou falar aqui sobre aspectos geográficos da Serra do Cipó, basicamente vou começar falando dos aspectos fisiográficos, principalmente sobre a geologia, que eu acho que é o ponto que é mais marcante nesse ambiente de campo rupestre, que é a primeira coisa que realmente chama a atenção, e claro que toda a questão toda a estrutura de vegetação e o próprio endemismo que tem na Serra dos Pinhascos como um todo, ele tem muito a ver com os aspectos geológicos. Depois falar um pouquinho de vegetação e de alguns aspectos geohistóricos aí da região do parque, propriamente dita ali, Cardiomota, Serra do Cipó. Então, a Serra do Cipó, ela está localizada na Serra do Espinhaço, que é o que hoje é a reserva da biosfera, de acordo com a Unesco, da Serra do Espinhaço. Então, ela está aqui, mais ou menos, está no que a gente chama de Serra do Espinhaço Meridional, que é a setentrional já é lá para a Bahia. Então, dentro aqui da Serra do Espinhaço Meridional, a gente tem aqui a Serra do Cipó, e o quadrilátero também ele é considerado parte daqui da reserva da biosfera. Aqui é só essa figura aqui, esse artigo que a gente publicou em 2019, da região que potencialmente iríamos amostrar caso fôssemos a campo nessa disciplina. Mas não haverá, no futuro haverá oportunidade para a gente ir lá no Parque do Cipó. Então, olha só, gente, a Serra do Cipó, ela é um local que a gente tem uma diversidade geomorfológica, ela é um divisor de biomas e de bacias também, então ali é uma zona de contato ali entre bioma cerrado e Mata Atlântica, entre as divisões entre as bacias do Rio São Francisco e bacia do Rio Doce. Ele tem uma história biogeográfica muito interessante, porque a gente tem que pensar que é um ambiente que ele é o que a gente chama, ele está dentro do cráton São Francisco, então ele é tectonicamente estável há mais de 1 bilhão de anos. Só para a gente ter uma ideia, por exemplo, se a gente for pegar as paisagens da Europa, os Alpes mesmo tem aí data do Cenozoico, 65 milhões de anos, então é uma paisagem muito mais nova. E por ser uma paisagem mais nova, sempre você tem grandes eventos de desestabilização que vão ali, de certa maneira, influenciar na questão da biodiversidade. E, por fim, também a gente tem a questão que é uma região de beleza cênica, enfim, balneários, então o que a gente tem hoje é uma pressão turística muito forte. Então, olha só, quando a gente está tratando de geologia e geomorfologia da região da Serra do Cipó, o que mais chama atenção é o que eu estou chamando aqui de partes altas, que são os quartzitos, que são rochas metamórficas, metasedimentares, que se relacionam com o ambiente de sedimentação marinha. O que é esse ambiente? Basicamente, a sedimentação de areia e posterior orógeno. O orógeno, na verdade, é o que? É o sorrimento da cadeia do espinhaço. Já na parte mais baixa, que não é tanto o nosso foco, mas é um pouco ali da região, a parte mais baixa ela já é de rochas calcárias pertencentes ao grupo Bambuí, que é uma deposição química, deposição de rochas e formado pela carbonatação do carbonato de cálcio em ambientes de sedimentação marinhos aí há 900 milhões de anos. Então, olha só que interessante. A gente sabe que a crosta terrestre ela é regida pelos ciclos geotectônicos. Então, pela questão da teoria de tectônica de placas, da tectônica global, que é o nome mais correto atualmente, a gente sabe que a litosfera está em constante movimento. Então, como é que foi formado a cadeia do espinhaço? Basicamente, há mais ou menos 1,8 bilhões de anos, houve um rifteamento da crosta continental, que é o quê? Que é essa abertura aqui. Essa abertura ela é formada basicamente aqui por um pequeno... na verdade, não pequeno, mas assim, por movimentos do magma, ascendentes de magma, que vão fazer essa ruptura aqui da litosfera e vai criar esse rift. Esse rift, o que acontece? Ele se torna uma margem continental. Então, você tem aqui deposição de sedimentos que vem que vem do continente, que são sedimentos de mar raso. Então, por exemplo, quando a gente vai na praia, o que tem na praia ali perto da parte do litoral? A gente tem areia, porque a deposição da areia ela vai acontecer mais próximo ao continente. E quanto mais a gente vai indo mais distante, na plataforma continental, você tem sedimentos mais finos. Então, o que acontece? Teve essa abertura do Rift Valley, que aí durou aí mais ou menos uns 600 bilhões de anos. Então, a deposição aqui dos sedimentos, de areia, basicamente. E aí, o que acontece? Para a gente ter uma ideia do que está acontecendo hoje, há um rifteamento que ocorre, por exemplo, na África, na região dos Grandes Lagos. É um processo parecido de abertura. Só que a gente só tem apenas 35 milhões de anos. Então, olha só, a gente está falando de uma história de 1 bilhão de anos. E, por exemplo, um outro evento parecido começou a acontecer aí há apenas 35 milhões de anos. Então, realmente, o espinhaço é muito antigo. Bem, depois, em 900 milhões de anos, na verdade, o rift ele foi abortado e houve movimento de compressão. Então, você teve um soerguimento aqui da cadeia do espinhaço, e aqui a divisão da bacia do Doce, que ela está no patamar mais baixo, que, por exemplo, a bacia do São Francisco, onde a gente teve aqui a deposição aqui dos sedimentos aqui do Grupo Bambuí. Então, você tem a bacia do São Francisco mais alta que a bacia do Doce, e você tem a Serra do Espinhaço fazendo esse divisor. E aí, o que acontece? Esse movimento de compressão, ele é o movimento, do ponto de vista regional, mais marcante. Só que, claro, que a gente tem os outros movimentos de deformação da crosta terrestre. Mas, basicamente, o que aconteceu? Você teve um dobramento, que é o que a gente consegue enxergar ali nas rochas da cadeia do espinhaço como um todo. E aqui, o que acontece? A drenagem ela vai se encaixar dentro desses dobramentos, ou então dentro das linhas de fraqueza aqui das falhas, no geral, e é onde a drenagem vai se encaixar. E aqui, o que acontece? Onde você tem ruptura, nós teremos o quê? Nós teremos as quedas d'água. Então, é uma região que tem muita cachoeira, porque ela está basicamente condicionado pela geologia. Então, aqui a gente tem algumas fotos aqui da região. Aqui em branquinho eu coloquei o limite do parque da Serra do Curral, da Serra do Cipó. Aqui está como Cardeal-Mota, que é o distrito que anteriormente chamava Cardeal-Mota e hoje se chama Serra do Cipó. Então, o que a gente está vendo? A gente vê que a rede de drenagem ela está totalmente condicionada aqui às fraturas que ocorrem aqui no quartzito. Então, aqui a gente tem o grupo espinhaço, aqui a gente tem o grupo bambuí, que é a parte mais baixa da região. Aqui, sobre um outro ângulo, isso aqui são imagens do Google Earth. Então, aqui o cânion das Bandeirinhas, aqui que todo mundo conhece. Então, a entrada do parque, aqui é a portaria do parque. Então, só para a gente também ter uma noção aqui por um outro ângulo da geologia aqui, dos quartzitos. E essa terceira aqui, então, temos aqui como foco o córrego do Indaiá, que é onde iríamos fazer algumas das nossas coletas. Então, aqui o divisor de bacias entre a bacia do Rio São Francisco e a bacia do Rio Doce. E, como eu disse, a bacia do Rio Doce está num patamar altimétrico muito... há uma amplitude altimétrica maior do que a do São Francisco, dentro aqui, após o divisor de bacia. Então, o que acontece? Como o Ricardo disse, a hipótese de não ter peixes, enfim, lá no Indaiá, a gente ainda tem que estudar bastante, mas o que talvez possa ter ocorrido é que você tem aqui uma ruptura muito grande de terreno e você não tem a conectividade da parte alta com a parte baixa. Isso pode ser um indício, apesar que a gente já foi na Serra da Canastra, na parte alta da Canastra tem peixes. Então, enfim, é difícil contar essa história dessa biogeografia da região. Então, o que a gente consegue, a partir desses elementos, é tentar criar hipóteses e, enfim, discutir essas hipóteses aí ao longo do tempo. Bem, em relação à vegetação, o bioma cerrado, apesar do parque estar na região da Serra do Cipó, estar no bioma cerrado, ele está ali na zona de transição entre Cerrado e Mata Atlântica. E é muito interessante, porque o bioma cerrado, ele é um bioma que ele é rico em fitofisionomias. A gente tem aí desde formações florestais, formações de tipo savana, e a vegetação foco nosso aqui é o campo rupestre, que vai estar associado principalmente aos afloramentos de quartzitos. Então, eles vão estar se desenvolvendo ou nas frestas dos afloramentos ou em solos muito delgados, que a gente chama de neossolos litólicos. Então, neossolos, porque são solos novos, litólicos de origem de rocha. Então, o que acontece? É um ambiente que, ele é muito biodiverso, mas ele é muito frágil. O solo ele é muito frágil. A vegetação, então, ela tem um porte herbáceo arbustivo. Então, é um ambiente bem, enfim, bem importante do ponto de vista da conservação e preservação. Falando aqui um pouquinho dos aspectos históricos, o nome da Serra do Cipó está relacionada ao rio Cipó. Agora, a história do rio Cipó vai ter várias versões, como todo topônimo tem sempre várias versões. Então, falam que é por causa de matéria orgânica, outros falam porque o rio tem a forma de cipós, enfim. Mas, basicamente, o rio é que dá nome à serra. Bacia do Rio São Francisco, ela foi um importante vetor de ocupação do território nos séculos 18 e 19, quando começou a interiorização da ocupação do território brasileiro. E o distrito de Cardeal Mota, que é atual distrito de Serra do Cipó, ele tem uma história um pouco mais recente. Se a gente for pegar do ponto de vista ponto de vista legal, ele foi criado juntamente com a emancipação do município de Santana do Riacho em 1962. E em 2003, ele passou a ter a sua denominação atual de Serra do Cipó. Aí muito ligado pela questão turística mesmo. Então, olha só que interessante. Em 1938, quando foi feita a primeira cartografia oficial do estado de Minas Gerais, na verdade, de todo... enfim, para os levantamentos do censo de 1940. Então, aqui a gente tem a região de Cardeal Mota, enfim, de Serra do Cipó. E olha só, o que a gente tem aqui é o quê? A gente tem algumas fazendas apenas. Não tem nem enfim, a vila ou algum tipo de aglomeração. Então, é uma região que tem uma ocupação muito recente. Se a gente for pegar aqui na década de 60, são pouquíssimas casas que tem aqui no distrito de Cardeal Mota. Inclusive, esse nome aqui de Cardeal Mota, até onde eu consegui investigar, ele é relacionado ao arcebispo, que era o arcebispo de Diamantina, depois foi ser arcebispo de São Paulo. E aí, por fim, a gente tem aqui, por exemplo, uma foto de 2003 mostrando o distrito, e se a gente for pegar aqui 15 anos depois, 14 anos depois, a gente consegue perceber pelas imagens de satélite como que está acontecendo a intensificação da ocupação. E isso tem que ser visto com muita, preocupação, porque essa pressão do turismo vai impactar o ecossistema local, caso não tenha medidas corretas de gestão ambiental. Muito bem. Muito obrigado aqui por essa parte e estou aberto aí a perguntas.
Ô, Diego, muito obrigado, cara. Fantástica a sua apresentação, né? Você trouxe um conjunto grande de informações novas para o nosso workshop, para a nossa abordagem, né? Parabéns, né? Muito, muito bonito.
Obrigado.
E depois eu vou até te fazer um convite para você participar com a gente de um manuscrito que eu, o Marley e o Bob Hill estamos escrevendo sobre as Sky Islands aí, para você aproveitar esse material dessa sua palestra no manuscrito nosso, viu? Fantástico. Olha só, pelo caminhar do tempo, eu vou pedir o seguinte, que os estudantes nos enviem pelo Moodle as perguntas, e aí eu vou repassar essas perguntas para você, para que você possa responder. Podemos fazer assim?
Claro, sem problemas.
Ô, Marcos, uma sugestão que se eles quiserem mandar aqui no QIA, o Diego consegue digitar a resposta. Eu digitei umas respostas aqui no chat para a Bruna também, então é tranquilo.
Então ótimo.
Também fazendo aqui, que aí a gente... Com certeza.
Certo. Não, então vamos fazer isso. Por quê? Porque agora são 15 para as 10, e aí eu queria propor, então, 3 coisas. Primeiro, a mais importante, que o Diego, então, responda pelo QIA. Então, os estudantes da nossa disciplina do workshop no ECMVS façam, assim, suas perguntas, e o Diego vai responder. E, ao mesmo tempo, a gente vai dar um pequeno intervalo, como é uma disciplina importante, dar intervalo de 15 minutos, e, durante esse intervalo, Bob e eu faremos a conexão do Chris Robinson, nosso colega que virá participar também do workshop hoje. Podemos fazer assim? Maravilha. Então, ó, pequeno intervalo, perguntas no QIA, e às 10 horas a gente volta com a palestra do Chris Robinson. Obrigado aí, viu?
Ótimo. Muito bom, Diego. Gostei demais da sua palestra.
Nós estamos online, mas não, né? Tá só nós três.
Então, tá todo mundo aqui ainda. Tá todo mundo aqui. O Marcos só desligou para ele fazer o contato. Eu estou aproveitando para conversar com você aqui.
Fantástico, viu? Fantástico mesmo.
Eu adoro essa perspectiva de como que foi, né? Primeiro, a história do Craton, né? Ela sempre, desde que eu aprendi com o Schaefer ainda há muito tempo, isso me mudou muito a minha forma de pensar assim em como a crosta se movimenta, né? Tem uns blocos que não se mexem, né?
Não se
bater num caminhão, né?
Exatamente. Que é o caso do Craton São Francisco. Então, isso. É a zona que está aí parada. Tem 1 bilhão de anos que está sem muita confusão, vamos dizer assim.
O Craton amazônico, né? Então, a gente entende por que os Andes subiram, né? Porque bateu de frente também, de novo, com um tratorzão, né? E aí...
Bob, deixa eu te contar uma coisa. Na hora que o Chris conectar, a gente vai vê-lo aqui nos palestrantes, né?
Vai. Eu pedi ele ontem que entrasse pelo link de palestrantes, mas eu estou monitorando aqui no link de participantes também.
Tá.
Porque se ele aparecer por aqui, eu já fico ligado também.
Ô Bob, nós temos que voar com drone nos parques aqui que eu e o Marcos nós estamos trabalhando.
Cara, eu falei isso com o Marcos, é só a gente combinar, claro, combinar também com os parques, né? Porque é sempre bom. Mas, assim, é bem tranquilo. O Jan Lehmann, que é esse colega lá da Alemanha que eu te mandei, que tem o LiDAR lá, a gente está pedindo a compra do software que faz o processamento de imagem e tal.
E nós estamos comprando software lá no GC. Nós estamos comprando o Pixel 4D.
Esse é ótimo.
Nós estamos comprando o Pixel 4D, estamos comprando uma máquina para processamento. Eu estou montando a máquina. Então, assim, nós vamos ter como processar.
Cara, então é só marcar aqui.
O que acontece? Que eu estava preocupado mais com a questão do dossel, mas como ele pode voar para fazer a visada lateral e construindo o relevo, eu acho que vai dar certinho.
Eu acho que dá certo. O esquema do dossel é isso, assim, ele vai ter que voar acima do dossel, claro, né? Mas o dossel, normalmente, Diego, eu fiz lá na roça, por exemplo, recente, né? Para treinar mesmo as dificuldades da técnica, né? Até no que a Bruna perguntou aqui do que é, se precisa de muito treino, e de fato não, mas voando a 30 metros, por exemplo, 40 metros, você já tem o dossel todo para baixo, e aqui em BH, talvez 20 metros você já está acima do dossel, né? A gente está com umas imagens...
Sabe uma coisa que eu estava pensando durante a sua fala, Bob, e tem a ver também com o que o Diego estava falando aqui. Na verdade, assim, o drone é um equipamento, tem seu custo, claro, como todos os equipamentos que a gente usa em ciência, mas a partir do momento que alguém interessado, dedicado, resolve realmente operar ele, e a gente começa a fazer as conexões, as parcerias, as aplicações são enormes, assim. Então, por exemplo, eu nunca comprei um drone, por quê? Simplesmente porque eu não tenho paciência para querer aprender isso. Mas a partir do momento que a gente começa a trabalhar juntos, no próximo projeto que tiver, a gente começa, pede um assessor, pede uma coisa, pede outra, daqui a pouco, como o Ian mostrou naquela palestra que você e ele deram lá para o CMB, a gente pode facilmente estar dando até disciplina em torno disso, com aplicações para alunos de diferentes cursos, né?
Ô, Marcos, é uma série de coisas assim. Por exemplo, eu nunca tinha comprado um drone, né? Eu sacaneava muito brincando com o Fred, por exemplo, da história. E eu nunca tinha comprado porque não é algo que eu sentia necessidade para o meu uso de fotógrafo, inclusive. Mas quando tive a oportunidade, comprei pelo projeto, como a gente compra uma série de equipamentos, como a gente compra balança, como a gente compra fluxímetro e fluxômetro, essas coisas. E aí, mas claro, com a disposição de aprender, como você disse, né? Mas o importante é isso, assim, a gente vê a utilidade antes de comprar. O Diego perguntou aqui, o Diego Castro, qual o programa que eu usei para medir a largura da vegetação. É ArcGIS, Diego. Eu usei o QGIS especificamente. O Diego Macedo até me deu uma mão nos perfis lá que são possíveis de fazer. Mas depois que você faz a ortoimagem, né, e o Pix4D é um dos que fazem, ele georreferencia ela toda e gera um TIFF georreferenciado. Então, você abre ele no ArcGIS e mede o que você quiser na prática. Então, assim, é o que você falou, Marcos. Eu gosto da ideia disso, assim, não comprar nenhum equipamento que eu não veja o uso dele a princípio, né?
Bob, e para fazer o plano de voo, você usou qual?
O plano de voo dá para fazer com o drone deploy. Olha o Cris aí.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, hello.
Oh, man. Welcome on board.
Yeah, I was a little nervous. My computer glitched up there about 3 minutes ago, so I had to reboot everything. So it's working now. So yeah, I was clicking on the Ricardo. I clicked on your thing and it wasn't working. I was like, uh-oh. I think I've been too busy working on everything today, so had to turn it off and turn it back on again. So we should be okay.
Oh, great. Oh, first of all,
5 minutes before is just about time when the system starts breaking, isn't it?
Yeah. I can't wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow I've got a hybrid course I'm teaching tomorrow. So, and they've got Zoom hooked up and other things hooked up, and they just said, there it is, go for it. I'm like, yeah, good luck with that one. I'm a bit of an idiot when it comes to technology, so.
Oh, Chris, thank you for coming and enjoying the PRED workshop with us.
Say again?
Thank you for coming and enjoying the workshop with us. It's great.
Well, it's really sad we're not down there doing it, huh?
Yeah, man. We were discussing now about how we all are missing going to the field, but we are still positive and hope that in the near future, after having a vaccine, that we can invite you to come down to Brazil, and then we go to the field together.
Yeah, I was looking forward to see the national parks.
Yeah, man.
It would have been my first trip to South America as well. So
Oh, really?
It would have been on my life list, you know. So we got.
But you can relax because every other 5 minutes we are trying to find ways when the pandemic is out to bring you to go to the field with us. So we complain every other 5 minutes that you are not here with us and we are not going to the field. So as soon as it's possible, you are very welcome to come here to visit us.
I'm looking forward to it. I got real fortunate. I just picked up a nice grant from the National Science Foundation here for 4 years in the mountains. Yeah, so I do get to spend the next my last 4 years of before retirement hanging out in the mountains. So it's a good sign. Very lucky. I was really lucky. So
Is it in the Alps? The mountains you are researching there?
Yeah, this one is it's all over the Swiss Alps.
Okay.
So 5 different catchments, and each one's at least 3-4 days at a time. So
Well, last year,
nice restaurants, nice hotels.
Oh yeah, and very nice views.
Not quite like the old Yellowstone days, but it's still.
But yeah, I think the year before last, I went to Austria, actually, to a course, and then we stayed in, forgot the name of the place now, but it will come sometime. But we stayed in a very nice house in the mountains, and it was the first time that I was introduced to the Alps rivers, because first time I went to the Alps was in Switzerland, in Santis, but it was completely frozen, so no rivers were available to dig in. But yeah, this time in Austria was very good.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some insights on some alpine systems today, in fact. But no, it's pretty cool because some of these sites I've not been to for 20 years. So
Okay.
last Sunday or Sunday before, I actually walked the valley. I walked with one of my first graduate students back 20 years ago. Wow, it's really amazing. I actually stayed in a berg house, mountain house, with the guy that actually ran the place 20 years ago. He's 70+ years old and still running it now. He didn't remember me, of course, but he still fed me my beer, so that was okay.
And the good thing, I remind the name now, was Kleinwassertal in Austria. So it was good because we had a water running in front of the house, and it was cold enough to freeze the beer. So it was good to put all the beer inside and have all the students hanging out there after field work.
That's probably the biggest thing we miss, is this interaction with the students, It's like this year I was involved in a course with 160 students on an environmental problem solving course. And typically we have like a theater kind of presentations where they get up and do posters, and they have installments of what they're trying to determine. And they're actually in the field making decisions with landowners and people that are really involved in it. And it's actually a very innovative course. It won what we call the Kite Award at the ETH this year, which is really a prestigious award for teaching. I wasn't a lead of the course, but I was involved in it, luckily. But it's just such inspirational. It's the first semester kids, and it's for 1 year, so first semester and second semester. And I think we still have a chance, man. These young ones coming up are very enthusiastic, and I just became so inspired. It was on alpine systems and glacial water and all that. And the one before that was on a land use and water effects in another area of Switzerland. But so I was involved in two years of this, and both times it's just amazing how creative and basically passionate these kids are about the environment. So I think we have a chance yet. I don't, might be past my lifetime, but I think we're leaving it in some pretty good hands, actually.
Yeah, I'm actually quite positive about, despite all the odds, I'm very positive to what we can do, especially with the information that we are generating now. So such decisions can be more informed, for example, and then we can have inspire the students. Plus, good information is a very good scenario in the end.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, the stuff that I'll be talking about today in the last part of the talk is some new stuff that we're doing, and then I'm like just going, no, I need 10 more years. I need 10 more years, because it's such novel things that she's finding. Is like, oh shit, man, I don't want to leave this place yet.
Yeah.
It's the retirement game is really tough. It's just playing hell with me, frankly, because you have to do it 4 years in advance. All the grants have to come in now. You can't, I won't be applying for grants probably for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Now I'm already down my last 2 doctoral students. They're done. I got 2 of those. I don't take on doctoral students now because I just won't be able to supervise them. I take on masters and postdocs. And it's like, geez.
Yeah.
That's still 4 years away yet. Which is. The kids are going into university going, oh, 4 years is so long. I'm like, Jesus, man. 4 years of blink of an eyeball,
Yeah, I think this pandemic year is making us reflect upon how fast things go, because this year it was absolutely fast compared to the previous ones. Yeah. And then we were exposed to how fast things can can go in life and then value it more. So 4 years PhDs is a blink of an eye, but it's such a good times.
And how important time really is.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know, for a year, I didn't do anything.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I went out to my terrace and, you know, I made a grill every day, barbecued every day.
Well, that's the problem here for me, because I live in a quite small apartment, so I couldn't barbecue every day. But I think if I could have done that, the pandemic would be easier.
I was so weird. My family is just so fortunate, you know. All I could imagine, you know, I just see the things on TV where these people live in these small flats, and all they have to do is look out a window for their air, and you know, they can't go outside. We're like, oh, I don't know what I would have done, frankly. You know, I think I would have just broke all the regulations and been in jail somewhere.
Well, for us here, what saved me and my wife was that we have a very small cottage close by here with my family that we never actually valued that much. But this year, I think this small piece of land gained so much value for us. We can go there and escape the apartment for at least a weekend.
Oh, it's incredible.
Sap the energy again, yeah.
Really need it, you know. It's the Swiss have been very good about keeping the regulations, and you know, I think our numbers they're increased a little bit like throughout Europe, but it's actually in Switzerland it's quite stable now. We've got about 400 cases from last week. Mm-hmm. Well, I just hope they continue there. They got pretty good mask enforcement in place, so all the public places you're wearing masks, and so you know, compared to some other people that don't listen, it's really important.
Oh yeah. But I think that compared to other countries, Switzerland is very fortunate in terms of how people understand the rules.
You know, they tend to be a little more educated than some other countries, and the mentality is in the fact of save your ass and save someone else.
In terms of understanding the reason that things are happening, I think Switzerland, more than any other country that I've been to, is a very interesting place to observe. I remember being in Zurich, for example, and my friend that was hosting me there, we had to jump off the tram one stop before his house because it was not Zurich anymore, it was Zolikon.
Oh yeah.
And it was absolutely nice to me to see that it was 400 meters. Of course we could walk, but probably no regulation would be applied in such a small, such a short period inside the tram. But we jumped before and walked, and everybody did that like so naturally that it rang a bell for me that we can do that quite well without harming the system. Marcus?
It helps when if you stay on that tram and you get this 100 franc fine, you know, if you stay on. So it's like
that's the point, yeah.
I think it's cheaper to walk the 400 meters.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Chris, shall we open your slides presentation, please?
Let's do that.
And
share
as I said, we are working the Zoom, but the live is being transmitted by the YouTube to our audience. Okay. And our graduate students are also in the Zoom room.
Okay. I'll share the screen.
Yeah.
And do that. You guys see it?
Yeah, I can see it, yeah.
And Chris, I would like to ask you to please speak slowly because we all Brazilians might be more familiar with your slowly English, not the
Well, that's good. It takes my students 6 months to understand what I say. So. If you guys get anything today, it'll be amazing. Can you see the screen okay?
Yeah, we can see your screen. Yeah, it's perfect.
It's just normal.
So officially, Chris, again, thank you very much for coming to our workshop PRED. It's a pleasure to have you involved in our discussion. And I'm sorry that it's only by internet, but it will be good to involve you in our discussion. Hopefully, in the near future, we can invite you to come personally to our field, visiting our National Park of Serra do Cipó, National Park Serra da Caná. So we have lots of nice places, totally different from yours, to show you, to keep you in touch. So please.
I was really sad not being able to come down. It was really frustrating. Not only yours, but I've, you know, even my mother I haven't seen in a year and a half now, basically. So, and she's up 90 plus. And it's like, well, anyway, that's life, huh? So should I start?
Yeah, Chris, you can start. We can see your screen and everything is ready. So when you feel it's time, it's time.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, everybody, welcome to a presentation about trophic insights on some trophic relations in alpine flowing waters. And I'm about 60 years old now, and I've been working in the mountains for actually 40 years, believe it or not. So I've been a very lucky research scientist. I started out in the alpine area of Yellowstone and Idaho, the Frank Church Wilderness, actually on horseback, looking at wildfire ecology, which is probably a hot topic now. But I came to Eawag in '96, and I've been here 24 years in Switzerland. I'm actually applying for the passport now, believe it or not. My pension is coming up all too soon. But this talk today is about some things that we've been working on for probably the last 10, 15 years, but it's one that has grown considerably because of the technology and some of the analyses that we could actually run on the system. This first particular photo is one of my favorites, but it's the Val Roseg. And I was 1 week in Switzerland before I started working on this particular floodplain. And I've been up there every year since. So I was just up there 2 weeks ago, in fact. But what I want to talk about is this idea of trophic relations. And I think most of us visualize or have visualized streams in this diagram here, this typical food web kind of diagram, showing the leaves, the hyphomycetes, the algae, and how important it is for the consumers, whether they're stoneflies or shredders or scrapers, and how these can be translated into more predaceous invertebrates and vertebrates down into the food web. And most of that's been basically through our literature, and it's basically kind of one-sided and almost little strange, because it kind of shows our systems being almost like closed systems, and we know that these are not closed systems. But with that, we're able to study the trophic dynamics in those systems using what are now stable isotopes, and there's some new ones coming out as well that really help us out, showing these trophic relations in these systems. And I think with the advent of nitrogen and carbon isotopes, we're able to really determine some of the trophic relations in these systems and how important they really are and how they differ depending on where you're located. And I'm going to go through a whole series of basically projects that I've been involved with that have shown these kind of ideas. And I think my recent developments towards going into what came out with Baxter's little diagram, I think probably the most famous diagram on river systems to date, showing how open they really are and how important they are in terms of the aquatic realm, but also in terms of where they go in terms of supplying subsidies to these outside the river system kind of animals, whether it's spiders, which I'll be focusing on today, bats and birds, lizards, all these animals that are basically in the riparian zone and waiting for these aquatic insects and things to emerge and provide them with very important quality food resources. And so I'm going to end the talk today looking at this idea of these food resources. These are these long chain fatty acids that my doctoral student's now working on. And these data I will be showing are basically the really hot off the press. Some of the results just came out this week, so you're seeing stuff that's really novel. So I'm hoping you get excited about it. And as I was just talking to the panel that I retired in 4 years, and some of the stuff I'm doing now, I wish I had 10 more years to keep it going. But it does show you the process of science and how it develops over time. And I think even whether it's within one career, whether it's in the scientific lifespan of the world, basically, we can see how science progresses. So I started getting into stuff, just looking at stable isotopes, and most of my work, if you aren't familiar with my work, you notice that it's basically changes around a lot. I've been trained as a really broadly based ecologist, and most of my work is basically facilitating the ideas of my students and what they want to do. And in this particular case where I've been in Switzerland, most of the master's students will have one time in their career basically do research. So when I do get a master's student in, I try to facilitate their ideas and try to motivate them to do what they want to do for research. And this particular one was Nina DiCudno. She went out and did stable isotopes in 4 different catchments in Switzerland. And actually, these are some that I've been working on for almost 20 years as well. So we went in and looked at all the different non-glacial systems. So whether it's the Monterrey system, the Long Glacier, the Rosaic system, which I've been talking about already, or the Stein Glacier system. We went in and looked at the food webs or the trophic relations within all those systems, just using standard stable isotopes. And if you're not familiar with stable isotopes, you know that the carbon signature tells you which resource the animals are basically feeding on. And we currently now have very nice analyses through R that we can actually look at mixing models and determine the proportion of the diet that's derived from the different groups, whether it's these basal resources here in the colors. The blue one is actually a sea palm, so a Loch Ness organic matter. The green one is the algae in the stream, and the red is the F palm, so kind of a mixture of both of those. And we see this standard kind of relationship with the isotopes, and they should be all shifting towards the right when you're looking at these stable isotopes, indicating that they are feeding on these lower trophic levels. So you can move up through these basal resources into these primary consumers and into the predators of the system. So it shows you really nicely that there are these trophic relations in these systems. Quite simple in some regard. We just have basically 3 levels if you're just looking at within the river system. And these don't look at anything in terms of outside the river system, but they do show these trophic relations and how strong they really are. Even in these high alpine environments where you see mostly that it's treeless and a lack of vegetation in some regards. So based on that, I got really interested in some other aspects, and that was I got to hit this on the button. Let's back up a little bit, and part of this is that at AEVOG we're able to bring in students for exchange purposes, and this was a nice really study because it linked up our stable isotopes of what we do and what Derna Estevez out of Pepe Barquin's group up in northern Spain. And she came down for 6 months as an exchange student, and we analyzed this data together, and she made a rather beautiful paper out of it. But here she looked at 10 different catchments and looking at how land cover actually influences what we see in these different catchments in terms of where the resources are and how those resources are being consumed by the aquatic insects in these different catchments. So she had this beautiful gradient. This is a PCA analysis of the different parameters that she measured. But over on this other axis, you see the percent forest cover increasing along this PC1. This is the land cover gradient that she depicted. Here's chlorophyll A, or the algal component, decreasing, because as we well know, with forest cover, we have a decrease in periphyte biomass in these systems. And the more open ones are more autochthonous and fed by primary producers in terms of the energy resources. Then, of course, the leaf production, of course, had increased with the forest cover. So there's a really nice gradient in terms of forest cover and the degree of openness and versus closed canopy coverage of these systems. So they analyzed the food webs of these different catchments and came out with some rather nice results. And this is the results in terms of the percentage of the allochthonous assimilation. So this is the AA, is what the percent of the community, the tridivores, the omnivores, and carnivores, how much of that was actually assimilated based on allochthonous production. This is resources that are coming from outside the system, the leaves, these kind of resources that come into these forested systems. And on the bottom is this open bar graph, as these is the relation to the degree of allochthony. So how much of that basal resource is being used from the allochthonous resources being used by these different groups. And so it really shows nicely along this PCA1, which is our degree of allochthony or degree of forest cover, that actually the amount of allochthonous resource being consumed in that system also increases with that percent of the forest canopy coverage in the system. And it's also along this nice little gradient. So, even along the gradient, you see a gradual increase in the amount of allochthonous resources being consumed by the organisms within these different streams in these different catchments. So a very nice result that she came across with and she determined. And then along with that same thing, we've looked at the different areas of whether it's leaf litter biomass, whether it's basal resource biomass, prey biomass, and we look at the various groups that feed on these different groups. So detritivores feed on leaf litter biomass. You see a nice relationship along that resource base. Omnivores that feed on different kinds of resources feed on the basal resource biomass, depending on how much the quantity of the biomass is present. And even the carnivores, you see a large increase in terms of prey biomass and the positive relationship with the carnivore biomass in these systems. So even here, the predators in the system, which is part of our workshop, is predator-prey interactions in systems, is a nice relationship between the prey biomass and carnivore biomass within these river systems. But again, these are within the river system and not looking outside the river system. But the other aspect that came out of this paper was that even if you look at the carnivores, the predators in these systems, if you look along this gradient, this the degree of velocity along this x-axis in the 10 catchments, you see that this assemblage composition also shifts in accordance with the degree of forest cover. So you see these blue colored diagrams coming in very heavily, the limnoneid coming in very heavily in terms of increasing forest cover. And even this particular site here is just full of diticids. So these things also change in terms of how the land cover changes, and that affects the carnivores we have in our system. But even that, they do change the assemblage composition. These carnivores are still directly related to how much prey biomass is in each of these systems. So a very nice result that Derna found in that particular paper. So quite insightful. It showed that carnivores are very important in the system, that they are related directly to what we find in terms of the resources that are present in these systems. So then I was very fortunate. When I was in Idaho back in the early 90s, I was hoping to get into this particular drainage catchment, the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming. So I had been working in Yellowstone for 6 years, and I was in the Frank Church Wilderness in Idaho, also using horses and wrangling back in there, backpacking and horse packing back in these areas, look at fire ecology. And I've always had that dream on my bucket list as well, go to the Wind Rivers in Wyoming. This is a catchment above 3,000 meters, so it's quite high elevation, quite chilly. And it's one of these things that happened in my office where I get an email from somebody that says, "Yeah, I'm interested in your glacial work. Can I stop in and say hello?" And I said, "No." I always say yes because it never happens. And then, but this guy actually did show up. This is Craig Thompson. He was at the community college in Rock Springs in Wyoming, and he actually did show up. He's a glacial environmental geochemist, and he came out, and we actually spent various trips in the alpine environment, but also we got 2 trips to go into the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming, and that was on these horseback trips. And actually got my brother, my oldest brother, say, "Hey, this is a once in a lifetime, you got to come out." So we brought him along, and this also involved students, of course. So this was some Wyoming students that we had an exchange with, and actually these guys came over to Switzerland as well for the Swiss Alpine Invention. But we got them to go into the Wind Rivers with us. And then we had 2 expert wranglers that just packed us in and packed us out. And luckily I had some experience, so they allowed me to pack horses too. So that was really a fantastic experience. But this is where I started getting into some of the spider work. And this was quite a trip. So it took 2 days just to get into this backcountry area. We had a base camp down in the green zone here, this forest zone. And within that, we looked at this longitudinal gradient and trophic relations in these systems. And this lower site, number 9, it's not very high on the list here, but in the green was actually one of the forested sites. These other ones are all above a tree line, basically. And this is basically what it looked like. These photos will give you an idea of just how depauperate this landscape is. And we were able to actually sample spiders, ground spiders and web spiders up in these very high elevation environments. So it's almost at the pass. You can see where the glacier is just starting to melt. It had some ponds and pools in there. But it gives you an indication that even though these web spiders, which you think you need trees or something, but they build the webs between these large boulders and actually collect the insects when they come flying up the valley during the afternoon winds. So they caught these web spiders. And you see this nicely with this carbon isotope signature. So here's the carbon signature for the ground and spiders and the web building spiders, being very similar to what they are in terms of the aquatic assemblages. that we found in these systems, and they're very popular. I mean, it's mostly chironomids, some stoneflies, and we actually found a lot of blackfly larvae. These are the ones that suck your blood, if you're aware of those guys. And some caddisflies, believe it or not, but that's down here in the forest. So Site 9 is that forested site, and we actually got a quite diverse group down in that particular system. But it was showing that, and what we're finding out now is that these high alpine environments are basically being subsidized by the aquatic realm. So you may look at these streams and see them flowing through the landscape, but this is actually the energy source for these particular landscapes in a lot of these high alpine environments. And this, we would never have known that if we didn't do some of these stable isotope analyses to find out where these basal resources are being derived and where they're actually ending up in terms of the predators in these systems. So that was some of the original research we did on this carbon nitrogen isotopes using the riparian spiders, and it really opened the door in terms of how important these riparian organisms are, and how important the river is in terms of subsidizing these aquatic environments. And so you get this nice little diagram again, this, you know, the standard stable isotope diagrams with delta N and delta C on the x-axis, delta N on the y-axis, and you see this beautiful relationship again of everything heading towards the right, and you see the spiders right there basically feeding on the aquatic insects. Even down at Site 9, which is in the forested zone, but it's also, these spiders derived quite a bit of food from the riparian or from the aquatic resources that are coming off those streams. So it was another very insightful study that we completed, and back then I don't think we had R, so this is just all plotted out, but now we have R programming, where I think I'd like to go back in and actually calculate the mixing models and see how much of their diet was actually derived from the aquatic insect from these environments. Because as you can see in this picture, this photo here, there really is nothing else up there but these aquatic environments, and these environments are probably not as productive as you expect to see, but they're very productive in terms of providing food resources for these spiders to be able to inhabit this really harsh environment. That's actually all ice behind it. This is just a frozen glacier. Well, not frozen, it's melting very quickly, actually. But it just gives you an idea how important these systems are in terms of subsidizing the riparian organisms. So then back in 2017, this actually started in probably 2016 or something, the whole idea of intermittency got into play and how important it was in these alpine systems. And I got along with a couple of fellows here. This Emil, he was a research collaborator on the project, and we wrote a grant together and brought over Andre from New Zealand. He was a postdoc. He's a biogeochemist as well. We had an IT guy from AOVOG that actually supplied the sensors that we used to find out which systems were actually intermittent, which ones were not intermittent. And then we had a couple of students that popped along, and there's actually new students now in this project as it moves along. But this was the spearhead of the new SNF project that I have for the next 4 years, but we get based on the results of this particular study, which has been very, very profitable. And I think Andre's a magic writer. He's already gotten 4 papers out of this study in its own right. But Emil now works at Echo Bureau in Switzerland. Andre is now over in Melbourne, back in Australia, at a tenure track position as a professor. This is Christian Aby. He's my IT guy and sensor development guy that makes sure I don't screw up too badly. And these 2 kids are actually doing their PhDs now, so both of them are moving along very nicely. And the whole idea behind this project is that these glaciers are melting so quickly. So this is just some photos of the Rose Egg Glacier back in 1880, 2004. And actually what it looks like today, in fact, it doesn't look like this even today. I'll show you the photo later on. This is back probably 10 years ago, even, where we still had a glacier at the forefront. And that's the Rose Egg Glacier and the Geologia Glacier coming off this side. But over that time period, you see that we've had this increase in temperature across the Alps. And alpine systems tend to be the most sensitive to these high temperature changes. So we're seeing some real drastic increases in temperature, and the glaciers are melting so quickly that they estimate, at least for the alpine zone in the Swiss Alps, that anything above 3,000 or below 3,000 meters will be gone in about 50 years. And some of these are actually very tiny already. It's incredible. And I'll actually give you an indication of where it was when I first started in another photo later on. So we are actually involved in, how does this glacial recession influence the actual flow regime of the river network? So this internet stands for intermittency network of alpine catchments. So that's what the internet is. And so we're looking at these tributaries that come off these side slopes and into the basin that feeds the main channel itself, and not the main channel itself in terms of this particular study. So it was pretty cool. We looked at this high stream intermittency. So we actually plugged sensors into 31 different streams that flow into the floodplain itself. That's one of the later photos. You see the glacier. This is also missing now. I think the glacier now is just up in here. I think I have one photo in here for you. So it's the Val Roseg, and again, I've been in there studying this particular system for 20 years or better. 24 years, I guess now. So I know it quite well, and I definitely know the restaurant quite well. So Christian helped us develop these things. These might be handy for you folks as well. These are low-cost sensors that come out of the Hobo company. They're the light sensors, and we had them converted into connectivity sensors. So these little probes we had to reinstall. And there's some nice papers out. I think the one that we actually published also has the methods in it and how to actually do that. You basically just convert the light meter to a connectivity meter, and that gives you when the river is actually flowing. So when you have water contact between the two probes, it gives you a reading. It also has a temperature recording as well. So, but it takes a pretty skilled guy to put these connectors in correctly, so you don't have any leakage or anything of that nature. And then we installed these in little cases, these little plastic cases to protect them. And believe it or not, over the 2 years, I think we only lost 3 of these in that alpine system. But these are the ones we're using now in the new study as well. So we have about 100 of these out in different catchments now, and different river systems or stream systems throughout the Alps. And they work very well. I think each one is about 60 francs or 60 US dollars. So they're very inexpensive, and you can buy them. And if you lose one, you don't have to worry about too much. But that initial study was very cool. We actually had 30 streams that we looked at over the year. And this is a heat diagram showing when the systems had water and when they were dry. So when it's a dark blue, they were actually dry, and the red colors is when they were permanent or had flowing water in them. And actually, of all those 30 streams, you only had 3 or 4 that were flowing continuously throughout the year. So we got up to almost 90% intermittency of these side tributary channels in this high alpine environment. So we had that particular going for us. There was no real distinctive elevational difference as well. So these guys, no matter where you were, just depended if they had an ice sheet that they're feeding, if they're a groundwater system, or if they're basically snow fed and precipitation fed. But if you look at the heat map, each one of these lines is a stream. And there's 2 patterns here. One is the ones that were actually flowing continuously. But we also see this gradient in when they went dry in autumn. So that was also a very interesting thing. So there's a gradient. Some went dry quickly, and others went dry very slowly, but they did go dry during the winter period. And then also in the spring, they all tend to have, once the snow melt hits, they all tend to start flowing basically at the same time. So that was quite an interesting insight as well that came out of these small sensors that we had in place. So very interesting results. And basically, when they started analyzing the data, they came up with that we had basically 3 different kinds of river systems within the Roseg. One of these perennial systems, those are flowing continuously. So let this thing catch up. You see that the conductivity, this is relative conductivity. It's measured in terms of lux. So it actually gives us a nice aspect of the kinds of water that's coming into the system. We also found here in the middle one, I hope this thing doesn't lock up. It's starting to act funny. In the middle one here, we see that there's these seasonal intermittent ones, or these ones that tend to go dry in the autumn when the ice fields start freezing up and the river channel itself goes dry, so it's down to around 0. And then these periodically intermittent ones that could actually go dry at any time, basically. There, it seems like there it goes. So that's also quite interesting, but also going dry in the winter time, but they can be going dry at any time of the year itself. So they analyzed it in terms of, we actually took water chemistry, we determined water origin based on some of the conductivity values that we came from the meters, and actually the flow intermittency as well. So this was the flow intermittency value showing us our 3 types of streams in this particular catchment. Here is in terms of water temperature, so a very nice indicator as well of permanent systems versus non-permanent systems. The water origin based on basically conductivity values, primarily because if you have rainwater, it tend to have very low conductivity, and more groundwater systems tend to have higher conductivity. And then also in terms of water chemistry, and here we had some various parameters that we measured that were pretty good indicators of the type of water in each of these systems as well, whether it's with silica and nitrogen and phosphorus and some other measure that we used to look at these, to separate out these 3 different kinds of water systems in these alpine environments. So based on that information, we then went and determined that we did have these groundwater systems that are more permanent. We had these glacial fed systems, we had snowmelt systems and rainfall systems, and basically looking at the different degrees of conductivity and also the degrees of temperature. So the groundwater tends to be a little cooler than some of these rainfall snowmelt systems in some regards, and then the glacial systems. So it's a little bit it's kind of anticlimactic. We do know these 4 kinds of systems actually take place in alpine environments, but here we actually have some data based on sensor relations to give us a really nice quantitative aspect of these systems. So whether it's in conductivity, you see nice differences in the 3 ranges. The temperature, here's silica, and this is the aquatic, what is this thing? Looks like the emergence of some sort. Sorry, I can't read that very well. I'm sorry about the quality of the graph here as well, but they do have some nice signatures between those 3 type of systems within the Val Roseg floodplain itself. And this is just a graphical illustration of that in this particular diagram. So that Andre, like some of the geochemists, and he's basically the isotope guru. And then he ran the isotopes on all those systems. So we had 30 different sites that we analyzed stable isotopes in. Then this is just a composite of what it would basically look like. Again, showing the resources, the basal resources, these primary consumers, and also these predator, the predaceous insects within the river system themselves. We had the predators, the omnivores, primary consumers, and the basal resources. Then he did these mixing models and determined where and what this resources, how they ended up in the different food groups or different trophic aspects of these different food webs in these systems. Probably the most interesting thing we found was we look at flow intermittency, this is that PCA value on the 1 axis. We see that there's 2 things that happened. One was at the degree of sea palm. This is, of course, particulate organic matter, so coming off the riparian vegetation. So this is the allochthonous resources. The consumption of those resources actually decreased as we increased the flow intermittency in these systems. Then in contrast, you see the periphyte diet contribution actually increased. And we're like thinking about why would that be? But it's, what it boils down to is a degree of the quality resources in these different kinds of stream systems. So as we increase the flow intermittency, the sea palm is basically not being conditioned. And so the quality of that resource is actually being rather poor. The animals don't simply consume those resources. They consume the periphyte when they're flowing. The periphyte is being active, and this is a higher quality resource for these animals in these systems. Whereas in the more permanent system, when the sea palm actually enter those systems, it's being conditioned by the hyphomycetes and by the bacteria, and they actually are being consumed by the aquatic primary consumers in those systems. Whereas the periphyte takes a lesser role because it's, again, this quality food resource of the bacteria and the fungi associated with the sea palm is much greater in these systems. So a very nice pattern there, a very nice relationship that we found in those systems. And as we moved down through there, we actually got involved in the riparian arthropods as well. And then in the Roseg, we actually have a lot of ants. So we actually measured the isotopes of the ants. We actually measured the isotopes of the ground spiders in these systems. And you see that in the diagram here, this is just the seasonality of it. We see that the ground spiders and ants actually have overlapping isotope ratios. So they're basically just going out and feeding whatever they can find, which is why they're basically in the center of the isotope graph instead of moving over to the right, because they're feeding on both animals that are from different groups. So they're actually feeding on some of the terrestrial ones, but also on some of the riparian or the subsidized aquatic insects that are coming off these systems. So you see over here, these bar graphs are these three-dimensional plots at the isotope ratios of the spiders, excuse me, are actually quite variable, but very stable as well. So they're very located basically in the same basic location depending on where they're at. But even depending on what degree of intermittency there is, you have similar kind of isotope ratio. So a high degree of what homogenization or homogenization of the isotopes of these riparian predators in these alpine systems. So quite interesting in that regard. So they, even though there's the aquatic insects available, they still are feeding on quite a bit on other riparian animals in these systems, and they're basically omnivores, just feeding on whatever prey items are available in the system. So again, a different kind of trophic relation that we have here compared to what we had in like in the Wind Rivers, where those guys were probably predominantly feeding on these alpine aquatic insects. So in here you see the difference. So here, you know, in the alpine and the Wind River mountains, there was no grass and trees, whereas here we have quite a bit of vegetation as these systems are reacting to the climate shift that we're seeing. And this is going to turn into a very forested floodplain system very rapidly. I was just up there last week, and these trees are already double in size just from 2-3 years ago. So they're growing very, very, very rapidly. But here, Andre and Ben we decided to try and manipulate. Can we actually cause a system to go dry? Do we see the same patterns of the trophic relations that we do see when we look at the overall spatial dimension of all the river systems in this particular catchment? So here we got very lucky. We had a paired system. This is two sites. They're only about 10 meters away from each other. It was the one from the same water source, and the channel split. And we basically shut off the one with a dam and let the water flow to the other one. But it's a small system, so the flow was not increased tremendously to have any significant effect. And so we looked at it from a reference channel and the manipulated channel point of view. And this is a connectivity based on those sensors. When this reference channel had water the whole period during their manipulation, whereas manipulated channel actually it went dry, but there were these pulses of flow within a system, and those are actually response patterns to high rain events, so localized rainstorms that actually flooded the system and caused water to flow, which was actually very nice. We see that also present in our other intermittent systems throughout that catchment. And so also in terms of temperature, you see a stable kind of temperature in the reference channel. And of course, the temperature is increasing if you decrease the flow in that manipulated channel. So here you get an idea where the water was flowing in it, and we took the dam and increased it or decreased the flow in that particular channel, and actually eliminated the surface flow at periodic times. So it was quite successful in terms of trying to manipulate a flow in these high alpine environments. And did we see the results that we saw in the main study? In fact, we did. So here we look at invert density being lower once we put the dam in place, which we expect because there's no surface flow or minimal surface flow. The number of taxa as well, so taxonomic richness also decreased. The green bars are the reference, and the yellow are the manipulated site. And then here's the density of rheophilic, so the ones that actually like flowing water, so showing nice reaction to the intermittency as well. Also in terms of percent rheophilic, which would be similar to what we expect to see if we had the upper graph as well. So we did see some major changes in those assemblages, moving towards more intermittent kind of assemblage composition that we find in the other intermittent streams throughout the rosé. So here's a nice multivariate analysis of those changes. So here you see on the lower graph the aquatic insects that are associated with the different axes. So the yellow circles are the managed, the manipulated channel, moving over to these more groups that we find more common in intermittent systems, whereas the non-molybdenite site kept their rheophilic character. And you see that also in terms of the life cycles. If you look at during, before, and after, just showing the seasonality of the assemblage composition within the reference channel versus manipulated channel, just reflecting that the different life histories and the different assemblage composition within these two different kinds of streams in these alpine environments. So basically it's saying that these high alpine environments have a large degree of intermittency, but each one of these is reacting in some respect to the assemblage composition within those. And so the whole trophic relations within those systems are quite different as well, depending on what degree of intermittency there is in that system. Excuse me. And this is actually the really nice diagram. This is a recent photo. So when I first started, this is the Chiva Glacier. And when I first started, the glacier was down here in these boulders down at this level. So 20 years ago, that's where the glacier was. And at this point, I was just up there last week, even this part is gone now. It's just this side channel is flowing, and this part here has ice on it as well. So the glacier itself is split into two, and it has will be actually two river systems. Probably another 5-10 years, there'll be two basically river systems coming out of that particular glacial valley. So yeah, it also makes it interesting when you have to hike, because this used to take 1 hour to get here from the hotel. Now it takes 2 hours to get up to that level. So it makes our work a little more challenging in some respects, but more fun. So again, we looked at the food resources. So they looked at the reference channel and the manipulated channel. So here's the estimated periphyte assimilation. So we look at before, during, and after, and you can see that in the intermittent channel. Again, this degree of periphyte and biomass being used as a resource in the trophic relations increases with that intermittency level. So it follows exactly what we're seeing in the large picture of all the river systems put together. So here's the seed palm assimilation, the coarse particulate organic matter assimilation, also showing that decrease in the manipulated channel, as we would expect to see based on our earlier findings throughout the whole catchment. So that was quite nice. Here we didn't see much of a change in terms of the aquatic assimilation. There was an increase, but as in both sites. And I think we decided that this is primarily because these sites are only 10 meters apart. These ground spiders tend to be very, well, at least 10-meter home ranges, so they can just wander around and just find whatever they want to eat and consume it. So even though they're very important, they still found that they were basically eating the same kind of things in both systems, primarily because they're both very close together in space. Now this is the really cool part. I'll end with this particular study. This is just really some stuff that we're doing now. It's in some low elevation systems. So down here near Zurich, and Carmen is my graduate student. She's just doing a fantastic job on this. But we're looking at, what's the effect of these subsidies in terms of fatty acids, and these long chain fatty acids that have become very important especially in terms of the subsidies these aquatic insects are providing to spiders. And so she's looking at 4 main groups. EPA is one that's really important, and it's primarily produced by the aquatic system in principle, is the primary source of this particular fatty acid. These are the omega-3s that we all take as vitamins, basically. This omega-3 and omega-6 are both very important in terms of improving the quality of the food resource, but also in terms of, you see these animals using it for increasing their energy stores for reproduction. So it's very important. Some of these are very interesting, like this ARA is actually called a racacena, and it's actually, they believe that some of these ground-dwelling spiders can produce this particular fatty acid. So this one's quite interesting. We see the results. So she's looking at some of these, but most of these are produced by algae, and most of the stuff is being transferred up to the trophic food webs, out into the riparian zone, which through spiders, and also into the birds and other amphibians and reptiles that hang around these areas. So she spent a year looking at these emergent traps that collect the aquatic insects from different habitats in these different systems. And we focused on 2 sites because this whole idea was looking at flow regulation, how that actually affected the subsidies to the riparian community. So we looked at one was a Necker system here in the blue, and I'm sorry for anybody's colorblind, this might be fixed eventually. This was a natural flowing system, and we had a nice assemblage composition in that particular system, showing a nice gradient as we move along, the standard typical longitudinal gradient in river systems that we expected to see from a river continuum concept kind of idea. And then the glass system was heavily regulated, has a lot of sediment dams, so there's a lot of sediment depletion going on. The river is quite regulated, and the channel is quite regulated as well. So we have this more natural kind of flowing system, and also the glass system, which tends to be truncated and manipulated all the way down through the site. And also has a higher degree of nutrients and other sources of pollutants coming in the system, because there's agricultural lands and some urban areas that are along this particular system compared to the Necker, which is quite free flowing and natural. And here you see this just a PCA. So the Necker is far on the far right, separated completely from the glass system. And the glass system actually has 2, we found 2 basic subsets of data in our glass sites, where these 2 sites differ considerably with these 2 sites. These are the upper sites and these are the lower sites. So there's also a gradient, but there's a major tipping point in terms of the differences going on. And just some of the relationships you see. So here's total phosphorus, the glass versus Necker. You can see the quite difference in there. Nitrate is another indicator for nutrients, the nutrient differences, alkalinity, DOC as well, and also conductivity. As you'd see, if you expected more of a land use effect on your river system, you'd expect to see the conductivity to increase as well. And you see that nice difference there in terms of the Glatt and Necker. So based on those results, we expected to see that assemblage composition to shift, and also see that the PUFA levels, because of that, would also be translated through into the spiders, was her general hypothesis. Again, this data is just fresh off the computer, so she's just been analyzing it for a meeting yesterday. So I stole these data from her basically. But we do see some nice results. So here's some of the PUFAs. You can see that both the web spiders, these are tetranathids, and these lycosid ground spiders do have very high PUFA levels. I can't tell you what the levels would be. I think it's for humans, it's 100 to 300 micrograms per day we actually need, or something like that. But this is that EPA that was talked about. Here's this arachna, the one that the spiders actually can make, and you can see that the ground spider has a little higher levels there. But we think that's primarily because it may be able to actually produce this PUFA within its own body itself. So that might be one reason it has a higher level. But you see some of these other ones that are very high in terms of both the animals. And so they are getting a lot of PUFAs, and then suggesting that they are using the subsidies from the aquatic realm very intently in terms of their reproduction and life cycles. So she next dumped us into a multivariate analysis, and this is a lot of data to put into one particular graph, but it does show you nicely along these multivariate axes. These are the different PUFAs. So EPA and this aloes are very important, SDA. And we also incorporated the carbon-13 signatures because they use this a lot in the literature, and it gives you an idea of the trophic relations, a little more indicator of the trophic relations between your predators and what they're feeding on. So in this particular diagram, you see the green one is the web spider, the ground spider is this pink or rose color, and the dipters are very prevalent in some sites. In this particular diagram, the Glatt River system is on the upper part, and the Necker, the more natural system, is in the lower part. And then we have a spring, summer, and autumn that come into play here. So we see a nice seasonality and shifting in terms of these PUFA content as well within the different systems. So very interesting there. And if we get down here, this is the proportion of the spider diet. And you can see that the plecopterans are very high in the spring in terms of the Glatt center, the Glatt system, whereas some of the terrestrial insects were very prevalent in the Necker system. Then it shifts over. The dipterans are actually one of the more common species, common taxa within the GLOT system, because it's assemblage shift that we saw because of the degradation of that particular system, where stoneflies and mayflies are very common in the Necker system. They tend to be more prevalent in that system and their behavior in terms of how they're being fed upon by the riparian spiders. So then we get down to actually some of the more detailed work. And here she looked at, you know, this the red bars are the GLOT and the green bars are Necker. And you see some of these PUFAs, they actually increase over the season. So we have spring, summer, and autumn here. And you see this nice increase in the overall fatty acid content in these systems. But if you look at some of these guys where they're actually stable across the spring, summer, and autumn, but if you break that down and look at it from the percent of the fatty acids, you actually see that in spring it's very much higher. And we basically think now is that these riparian spiders are actually in the springtime are basically focusing on the riparian or the aquatic subsidies, because this is a high rich energy source of resource for these animals, especially because a lot of the riparian insects that have not actually become in high abundance enough for these animals to feed on. So they're actually feeding off the emerging insects and increasing their quality food intake, so that they can start reproducing earlier and then take advantage of the terrestrial riparian animals later on in the season. So summer and autumn, that's what you kind of see here in that respect. So a very nice relationship showing actually the seasonality in this intake of aquatic subspecies is very relevant for these aquatic these are riparian spiders in these different catchments. So very interesting in that regard. So if you look at the actual biomass export, this is the export dry mass that we have. So this is a dry mass base, so it's really a quantitative estimate of the biomass of these different insect groups coming out as emerging from the field. And like I said, the GLOT system is quite degraded, so it has a large number of dipterans, the midge larvae coming off. We also see the nice seasonal patterns that come off as well. So this is spring through autumn. So the spring, summer, and autumn. Well, you see that dipterans are very prevalent in the GLOT system, whereas in the Necker system, which is the more natural system, you see a lot of stoneflies, different species coming off. We haven't analyzed the actual species content yet. Some of the tricops, you see the nice life cycle patterns coming in with their emergence is also very prevalent during some periods of the year. And also the ephemeropterans as well coming off. And some midges, of course, as well. They're not absent from the system, of course, but they're not quite as prevalent as they are in terms of the GLOT system. So a nice contrast in terms of this longitudinal conductivity as we move from upper site, which is A, down to the landscape to F, which is a lower site in those catchments. So from A to in both catchments. So A to F is from upstream to downstream. And you're looking at 20, 30 kilometers of river section there. So it's quite a long distance of river to be analyzing. Now what's really cool, she just popped this out yesterday, so that's 2 days ago or something, but this gives you an idea of the similar patterns. This is an omega-3 PUFA export from those systems as well. So these are the aquatic insects that are emerging and the amount of PUFAs that they're actually subsidizing the riparian habitat with. And you get some nice ideas in terms of the annual cycles of the aquatic insects. So here's some of those patterns we saw in the graph just before in both of these particular diagrams, and also just the relative level of how much PUFA comes off at different times of the annual cycle, at least during the reproductive cycle or the growth cycle in these two systems. So some very nice results, and I think we're finding, this extends our idea of these whole trophic relations in these river systems. And I think from my point of view, this stuff is so fresh that I think that we'll probably need to see another 10 years of research on PUFAs and get a full context of how important these things really are. But a lot of animals require these omega-3s for their reproduction. These alpine spiders as well, but these ground spiders and riparian spiders are obviously feeding on these aquatic subsidies to improve the quality of their of their diet so they can actually increase their reproductive capacity in these different aquatic systems. So it just gives you another insight on somehow how these carnivores and predators are playing a large role in the system, and also how the aquatic realm actually will control and not control, but actually influence what we see in terms of aquatic insects and riparian arthropods and riparian spiders in these floodplain catchments. So that's where I'm at so far today, and I mean today, and actually that in this stage of this whole trophic idea, we have moved into a new project now. We're actually doing this whole idea across 4 or 5 different alpine catchments, and we actually said I have about 100 systems now being monitored, and we'll be collecting isotopes, food webs, biodiversity, the whole realm of analyses, conducting PUFA analyses on spiders and ants and all these other riparian animals that we find in these high elevation environments, and trying to get a more clear picture of the degree of allochthony, degree of autochthony, the degree of intermittency, and how the aquatic realm actually subsidizes the entire resource base of these high alpine catchments as glaciers recede over time. So I think I'll stop there and take any questions you may have, but hopefully give you guys some ideas and maybe some inspiration on how to use carbon isotopes, nitrogen isotopes, and especially these fatty acids, and getting more insights on how these systems really work. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Great talk, Chris. Thank you very much. It's amazing how many different and important examples you offer to us. We have many comments, some questions from our audience. As I explained to you, we have some graduate students in our Zoom room, and
Right.
they already typed here. Marden and Diego are postdocs in our graduate program. Janaína is a PhD student in our team. Marcelo Moretti also wants to talk with you.
Mm-hmm.
He sent some pictures of the Salt Lake City 2008 Congress, where we were 7 guys in a car. Remember that?
The taxi.
Taxi, yeah.
That was a great trip, and good food too.
Oh, great. So please, Chris, would you like to answer the questions in the KEA system here?
Sure.
Yeah, in the bottom there is the Q&A icon. If you click there, I think you can see you can read the questions
okay.
by yourself. So I think it's easier than some of them are a bit bigger. So if you read, you might miss some part.
So I think, for Martin, what we're seeing in these high alpine environments is actually the climate is affecting the vegetation as well. So especially in these lower, what I would call lower systems, below 3,000 meter, we're actually seeing floodplain forests develop. And in fact, the one site where I had the manipulated channel, the experimental channel, I was just unbelievably astounded this particular year when I walk in and these large trees and conifer trees are basically almost covering the streams now. They're up 4 meters, 5 meters tall. And that's probably in the last 10 years that they were able to develop like that. So I think anything below, 2,300 meter, you're going to see large floodplain forests come into play. One thing that came out recently in the Rose Egg, we found a tree up at 2,600, a dead tree that was in the glacial floodplain that we analyzed that was 600 years old. So tree line actually was above 2,600 at least 600 years ago. So that was, you'll probably be seeing a lot of, it'll probably move more towards allochthonous kind of resources instead of autochthonous, is what I would expect to see in a lot of these systems that become forested, basically. So it'll be really interesting to see how the animals take off. But we do see that they tend to be very plastic in their feeding behavior. So They eat whatever is coming in at this moment anyway. Some of the work by Marilla from Croatia on our alpine stuff has shown that they tend to be very, very plastic and eating whatever they can find in the system. So let's see. Well, another one, this one on the top fish. In your opinion, how do you expect the absence of top fish predators will affect the trophic structure? These systems that we've been looking at have no fish. So you're looking at ones with no fish. So it would be interesting what happens when we do add fish, actually. A lot of the alpine lakes have had fish introduced because people like to catch fish, of course. But these systems at the present time have a lack of fish. And I suppose that, as the glacials recede, we will start seeing fish migrate up in these catchments as well, and actually start colonizing at least some of the permanent systems. And I think they'll have a significant effect on the predator-prey interactions in those systems. What we do have in terms of the top predators are the dippers, this bird that will feed on aquatic insects. And I actually do see them up in the Alps now in some of these high elevation environments. Other animals that have come in are the odonauts, the dragonflies, some of these large dragonflies. We're now seeing them up above 2,600 meters, and they were not present even 3-4 years ago. So these predators are starting to colonize these systems. And if you know odonauts, they are very, very intense predators in aquatic systems. So if these guys start having larger populations, it'll be really interesting to see how much of an influence they have on the trophic relations in these high alpine environments. Let's see. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. This one says, do you think the regions you have shown, this from Diego, show that does not have a riparian vegetation, that climatic change is the main factors affecting the energy flow? And there are a lot of respects we do see that. I mean, we are seeing that the climate change affect the vegetation as well, but the ones that's kind of a delayed response. So what we are seeing now is this degree of intermittency actually increasing. So a lot of these systems do go dry. And of course, the temperature, I've had some of my sites actually had temperatures up to 20 plus in some of these systems. 15 to 20 is very common now, or if you think about endemic alpine species, the barrier of temperature is around 4 degrees. And once you get above 4 degrees, you start getting all these low elevation species that can come up and colonize these systems. And so in that regard, we're going to see a lot of trophic changes occurring very rapidly. Like I say, the odonauts are coming up, the dragonflies are up already. The other big one that I've noticed in the rose egg is the blepharocerid larvae, this midge, net-winged midge. Their numbers are considerably high now. So we are seeing some really major changes. In terms of the dynamics of recolonizing these intermittent systems, it's quite nice. We have done studies on that, and I recommend you read Marie Lay's work or Lisa Shama's work on how some of the caddisflies actually recolonize these intermittent systems and some of the adaptations they have to actually withstand intermittency by either going through a diapause, or freeze diapause or something of this nature. So some interesting physiological responses as well. So just not trophic structure, energy flow, but also in terms of physiological responses that we see. But I think as long, once this riparian vegetation does change, I think we're going to see more allochthonous organic matter being consumed, especially if the system is permanent. But I think as we've seen in the intermittent sites, the sea palm is not conditioned well enough to be a quality food resource. And so the animals just ignore it, and they actually will feed on the periphyton. When the river is flowing, the periphyton is quite productive, and they can feed on the periphyton, which is a more quality food resource for these particular organisms. Oh, do you think isotope signals? Also, Diego Signals of macroinverse change, comparing sites with and without top predators. I tend to think not, because they are feeding on the basal resources. And I think as we move up the trophic web, we see, like we saw with the ants and spiders, they tend to homogenize in terms of what their nutrient needs are. So in a lot of respects, they consume what's available, but their isotopic signatures basically will not change. And I think with a top predator, I think even the aquatic insects that were feeding on the basal resources, they're still feeding on those basal resources. So their isotopic signatures will probably stay quite similar to what they are, depending on what the basal resource signatures are. So if it goes to Loch-Ness, and there'll be more Loch-Ness carbon signatures versus Loch-Ness carbon signatures. So it'd be more of a carbon play on that system. But I think the top predators will probably still homogenize those carbon resources for their physiological needs. But that's also an open question that really needs some more work done. So that's one cool thing about these isotopes. It's just so many questions coming out still that, like I said, I wish I had 10 more years to get really into it and get involved in it. So here's one by Isabella. What is the study of trophic relationships of neotropical aquatic ecosystems? Yeah, good question. Marcos, what is it? What are the future perspectives?
I hope that you can come and work with us, Chris.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Let me get down there first and we'll find out.
But if I can comment on that, during your talk, especially in your first or second slide, you showed the relationships, the intertwined relationships between terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. And coming from a terrestrial background, I think these future perspectives involve a lot the meta-ecosystem idea of the interchange between trophic relationships in the aquatic systems affecting the terrestrial ecosystems and interactions as well. I think there is this paper by Tiffany Knight et al. 2005, I think, in Science, of the fishes affecting pollination. And I think this is a very nice path to follow. That's one of my guesses.
Yeah, we should probably be thinking about along those lines as well. Huh? But I think just in some regards, we really have to start looking outside the river systems and look at this whole riparian river interaction. And that's, how many studies do we know of looking at just riparian predators in river systems? Not many. Huh? No one ever looks at it. They don't look at that. I remember back when I was working in Michigan, going out to the field site and looking at these birds that are feeding on the aquatic insects coming from the river. And I wish I knew what I knew now back then. I probably would have shifted my entire career to look at subsidies, but even back then, But of course, we didn't have all the cool toys we have now to play with. And so, but either way, I think we need to really start thinking outside these systems. And also from a management point of view, even resource managers are now getting more into the floodplain dynamics and how important it is to manage riparian zones in terms of the river system itself, but also for the floodplain itself. That's probably the biggest shift I see actually over in Europe, at least, is that we're really getting into more, not river management, but more river floodplain management. And that's a real good sign to see. I'm really happy to see that moving along. And
in Brazil, we may have some of the disasters that happened recently also summing up to the study of trophic relationships, as some of the river systems were completely reset by the dam disasters that we had recently. There might be a window of opportunity to understand what happens to the trophic relationships when we basically remove part of the system.
That's exactly right. And also, that just hit me for an idea as well, in terms that, we need to really be multidisciplinary. So if you start looking at these floodplain systems, we need the hydrologists in there, the eco-hydrologists to get in there and explain some of the actual hydrology of the system as well. Because a lot of these floodplain systems, the hydrology dictates what we find in these floodplain ponds and pools, and even in the main channel sites. It's really interesting, this whole interactive sphere of hydrology and trophic relations in these, even in floodplain ponds, which are becoming more of a management scenario as well. So not a very good answer for you, but I hope it worked out all right. So here's one by, let's see. Oh, let's see. Here's the absence of a top predator in an aquatic ecosystem affected community structure that is at the terrestrial interface. Whew, that's a tough one. Part of, I think, if we do remove these top predators, we will be seeing, a shift in the trophic dynamics occurring in the system, but also in terms of, what animals are active when they're actually emerging. How is that affecting the subsidy across the interface? I don't have any really good answer for you here, I think, Diana. But we do know, top predators do directly influence the presence and absence of organisms in a community. So I'm thinking now, again, in terms of these odonats that are actually not being absent, but they were absent before. Now they're becoming present in our alpine systems, and these guys are voracious predators, so they can actually probably reduce the subsidies of aquatic insects to some of the riparian areas. But I think that's an open question, and it may be one that actually could be quite interesting to study. That'd be really interesting. Marcos Vaccaro, that's a neat question. I think it'd be interesting to. Sounds like a nice PhD.
Yeah, sure.
So there you go. Yeah, otherwise I don't know if I don't have a good answer for you, Diane, on that one. It sounds like some great experimental work could be done though. So the next one's easy, I can say thanks. Thank you for being here to listen to it, Martin. So a couple ones for Paula. One is the periphyte abundance, and that was actually measured using ash-free dry mass values, stable isotopes, and I think Andre actually used chlorophyll A in some of that work as well. I know for Aderna, she used chlorophyll A and also ash-free dry mass, but they were similar in terms of response patterns. So I think if you don't have the access to, to run chlorophyll A, you could probably get away with using just ash-free dry mass and have very similar results if you have a very productive system. You have to be aware that you have a lot of senescent cells, and you might have some differences between chlorophyll A and periphyte biomass, but than ash-free dry mass. But either one should work. But we did use a combination of the biomass plus the astable isotopes to get an idea of the actual amount of subsidies, and this was really prevalent in the last project I talked about with Carmen's work. We had, like I say, all that stuff was just coming out, and we had all the preliminary data, but all the data is based on microgram per biomass. So you have it's all biomass derived, so it's all standardized now. So very important to have the biomass data that you have when you start analyzing these kind of trophic relations. So an important question, and one is, yes, you need the biomass, but you also need the carbon isotopes to see where that biomass is going. The tadpoles, actually we have an alpine frog that lives in these high elevation environments, and the tadpoles can be very dense at times. They basically feed on basal resources, but if one dies in the system, then they turn cannibalistic. So it's interesting, and it's surprising where you find these frogs. The other aspect we had was one study done by my postdoc now, Pierre Chanut, down in the Matcha floodplain, and we were looking at floodplain ponds in terms of hydrology and trophic. He's also has to publish that paper yet, but the trophic food webs of those systems. And we had one pond that was just filled with tadpoles. And it was more of a stable system, but it also did go dry. But they had a significant effect on the water chemistry. As you know, they do a lot of peeing and pooing. And that really dropped the pH level down to around 5 even in that particular system compared to some of the other systems. And I have no idea what they're feeding on, but I think it must have been just more of a detrital-based kind of resources that they're feeding on. It was amazing what they did to the water chemistry of that particular pond. So I think the food availability component is primarily the relationship of what the basic resources are present in the system, but also the hydrology of the system. Why some ponds have more tadpoles than other ponds, I couldn't tell you. I'm not a specialist in that area, but it's a good question. Very interesting. Those guys are part of the trophic web up in the alpine system here. For us, it's a matter. It's more complex than just going out and collecting, because we have to get very special permits to even touch them now. So it's one reason I don't work on fish and I don't work on other vertebrates, because it takes months to get the permits to even kill one for an isotope analysis. Can't even take a leg or something to run them. So it's for me, it's really problematic, and it's a change in how we do our science. But if you want to take the time to get the permits, then it's probably well worth some of the effort. I did miss out on a very nice graduate or postdoc, actually, Twinings. You might know her. She works on birds, and we were going to get her in the lab, but we couldn't get the permits for her to collect the blood from the birds. So she ended up going to Germany doing the same work, but their permit system is a little easier. But Swiss one's very difficult. So very seldom I work on fish anymore, and very seldom I do anything other than just the aquatic insects, because they're still considered just nothing more than an aquatic insect. So sorry, I can't answer a better answer there for you. Let's see what we got. This is by Paula. Yeah, one thing we do see is that global warming. I don't know if it's actually affecting the degree of intermittency, because a lot of these systems in these alpine catchments tend to be related to the ice fields, and when they dry or when they freeze during the autumn period, then these systems go dry. But the groundwater systems tend to be perennial, and they stay quite stable. The consumption of the paraphyte, I think, is quite interesting. That's what Andre found in terms of, just the quality of the paraphyte is much greater than the quality of the particular organic matter that came from the allochthonous sources. So these animals are actually preferentially feeding on the paraphyte in these systems. And once the flow does resume, they tend to be warmer. So the temperature does impact the kinds of algae we do see, and also the quantity of that algae. So there's plenty of food resource for these animals. And what they just tend to preferentially feed on, because it's a higher quality food resource, and that's what they're basically looking after, is getting that high quality food resource. So yeah, temperature does increase the production, and like I say, we are seeing sites now up there with 15 to 20 degrees. I had one that actually measured 26 degrees one time. So they are quite warmer, and of course temperature influences all the physiological components of our ecosystem. So one aspect of that is greater productivity with increasing temperature. So certainly a direct relationship there. This is by Larissa on Odonata. Yeah, actually in these alpine systems, we have not had Odonata previously, and now they are just coming into play. The study by Pierre on the Matcha floodplain, the ponds, we did have Odonata, but that paper's still pending yet, so I'm not sure what he's found out. But I think if these Odonata do start becoming prevalent in these alpine systems, and they tend to be looking like they will be, I haven't seen them reproduce yet, but we've been seeing adults flying in some of these alpine basins quite often. So there must be some reproduction going on. And I think once they do the system and start colonizing it, there'll be some drastic changes, really major changes in the assemblages in terms of overall composition and basically how the energy is being moved through the system. Like some of the work by Hildrew and those guys in some of those UK streams will give you an idea how important odonata are if you know those papers. The one on the winterbourne streams is really, really incredible, where that odonata came in and basically shifted the entire food web assemblage to a whole different kind of relationship. So yes, they'll be very important if they get to the numbers where they can be influenced, and they will definitely have an influence. So they're voracious predators, if you may know already. You put them in one tube of animals, and they're basically the only thing left at the end of it. So very, very interesting animals, and I think these systems are getting warmer now, where they can actually go up and complete life cycles within the summer period that we have up in these alpine systems. So yeah, they'll be important. Oh, here's one by let's see, Marzat. Yeah, very nice question, Marzat. I have done work on bacteria, and I think the ones I would recommend reading are the ones by Remo Fryman or Freeman. We just published those a couple of years back, where we did a whole series of papers on bacteria and alpine systems. So that would be a good starting point for you. The name's Freeman. I think the papers came out in 2015 or 2016. You'd also email me, and I can send you those PDFs if you wish to see those. We actually also did some nice work on bacteria, looking at how bacteria in rivers and floodplains interact during high flows. And that paper was just submitted to the ISMA journal. So there's some nice stuff on bacteria coming out. We also have, nice thing about bacteria is that we also have the tools now, some of the genetic analyses, that we can actually sequence these guys and find out who they are and what they're doing from a functional perspective. So the whole area of research coming out now, that whole area of bacterial ecology and in terms of ecosystem function is a wide open door for you. In terms of algae, I do a lot of work on the diatoms in alpine systems with some collaborators in Poland. I just suggest you read some of the papers that we have published. Not in terms of, I don't think most of it's in terms of just assemblage composition and changes with the climate or environmental change over time. So just have the data. I don't have it published yet, but we just finished up the last couple of years. And in terms of algae in the alpine system, we saw some major effects coming in around 2007, where we saw complete shifts. And actually the numbers of some of our alpine systems have dropped considerably in the last 3 or 4 years. So I was taking samples the same as I always do, and my collaborator said, "Hey man, there's not enough material for me to even look at." Like, well, I've been doing the same way for 20 years. And so the abundance of diatom in some of these alpine assemblages has gone down considerably. And it may be from the warming, climate change. It could be from changes in some of the water chemistry we're seeing. Some of these guys tend to be acidic diatoms, and others are not. So nutrients, climate change, that these are all affecting the diatom assemblages in these high alpine environments. So it's really a cool study, and it's a cool area to look at, because they're very sensitive. These high alpine diatoms are very sensitive to climate change, and I hope that's what we're seeing as well. And they're quite diverse. I mean, we have 200 plus species of diatoms in the one area that I study. So if you're into that, you better be good at your diatoms. And the reason we chose those 30 streams, there were only 30 streams in the system itself. Those were we sampled every stream there was in the Rosaic. So that was one that we basically had to monitor. We had a sensor in each and every system that was a tributary to the main channel. I think it might have been 2 or 3 that we missed, but they were basically all the sites that we had. And that's a pretty good number. Typically, in the last month, we've been putting out loggers and a lot of different systems, and most of them I think the rose egg is probably one that has the highest number, but mostly are up in these high alpine environments. I think some of our sites we were putting 20, 25 in, so 30 is quite high, but we try to cover every site there was in that particular system. And again, these sensors are very, essentially inexpensive, 60 bucks each. If you have a good IT guy to do the conversion, then it's even simpler. That can get expensive. I think we had the last 100 done from a local guy for 3,000 francs or something. But you do it yourself, but it's difficult. I would recommend having somebody that really does it. So I would recommend it. Hello, Alexandra. That was a nice one. I like that one. Okay, let's see. This is in terms of the rainfall patterns that we're seeing. We're also seeing major rainfall precipitation patterns shift in our alpine region. So we're seeing less, we have, well, let me change that a little bit. We have a February, I think it's February, where we have a sport holiday for kids, so they go skiing. And now these kids can't go skiing because there's no snow up in the mountains. We get all our snow now, basically in the late spring. A lot of that turns into rain, so they have these snow and rain events that come in, and they really dump a lot of precipitation. So it's really a concern for how we manage our waters and alpine systems. So we are seeing this really serious transition of when the comes, when the snow comes, and how that influences these intermittent systems. So we will be seeing shifts in precipitation patterns, and of course this will have direct relations to what we see in terms of flow regimes in these systems as well. So yeah, it's a major thing, and it's going to be really important in terms of the degree of intermittency in these systems, and when they go intermittent is probably even more important. Animals can adapt to these changes in terms of precipitation and flow patterns. So yeah, very important aspects coming in. Yep, I agree, Paula. They're great to study.
Chris, I think we're about time for lunchtime here, and you might be a bit tired after such a great talk and very, very great question and answer session. I think we had a very great amount of things, and you explored them quite well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the questions. They're actually very good questions and some brain poppers in there. So I think there's some research to be done, and hopefully this crew can get some of it done.
Yeah, when we have the field work part, as I said, every another 5 minutes I complain that we should go to the field soon. But as the head of the graduate program here as well, I thank you very much for your time here. I think we had this great opportunity to share this moment with you and to learn from your very interesting research, and in the end to see such beautiful landscapes as the one you show in your acknowledgments there.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of funny, because that was the goal in my life, was to be out in the mountains, and I think I did it.
Yeah, you did it quite well, by the way, generate a lot of knowledge as well. Marcus, if you want to close the session, I think it's great.
Okay. Chris, thank you very much for all your time, your energy, inputs, and exciting talk to all our students here. It was great. With these last words, I would like to thank you all for participating in this second day of PRED workshop. So thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody. Chris, thank you very much.